It's DLC 9 Postmortem time. Well, this is another pretty good one. In summary, alright, end of Postmortem. I always like to kind of copy-paste some of the stuff from each of the past Postmortems and then just build on it. So, from the beginning, DLC, it has the original intentions of like why DLC came about in the first place. And at the top here we have the four main points of why DLC should even exist. So if it weren't for some of these ideas, I wouldn't have done DLC 1 in the first place. And although I don't stick to it as, say, directly as I used to early on, DLC pretty well follows these kind of guidelines. These core principles of DLC at the top here. And I really haven't thought about this outside of postmortems for like the last couple years, but every time when we get to the postmortem, it's like, yeah, DLC is still pretty good at all that stuff. That's what we're still doing. DLC is doing a pretty good job. So I'd say we're sticking to that pretty well. After all, teams have to make maps. They get to play the maps together. There's some competition for everybody. It's flexible for people. We've done a pretty good job at that. We encourage competition, but there are plenty of ways to participate even if you don't compete. And we do a lot of unique, challenging kind of stuff all the time, both for grinding and map making. So, checks across the board. I think we're doing pretty well. I will spare the more lengthy history lesson when it comes to all past DLCs for this particular postmortem. If you really want the history, go look up another one maybe. But in general, these are some of the main points that you can see that we've come from. We've tried a lot of different stuff. DLC has been very different over time, and there have been some that have trended more towards a standard type of DLC, which is what we're trying to emulate more here. So in this case, you can think about DLC 9 in terms of coming from DLCs both 7 and 8. So we have a very similar style to 7, but we learned some stuff in 8 that we carried over. But no matter the DLC, there are always various challenges that I have to deal with as, the host. And they're always the same consistent kinds of issues that can happen to DLCs that I have to pay close attention to. And you could say that there have been lessons that I learned consistently as a result. And it's just how people act within DLC and events in general. But DLC being a big one, it really draws attention to some of this kind of stuff. So, for example, most people will have opinions on how good was this DLC. Did I enjoy this DLC? What's my favorite DLC? That kind of stuff. Now, a DLC is often perceived as a good DLC by very different kinds of people. And this always comes from people that enjoy something specific about this particular DLC. So that usually means, and is highly correlated to, if you're on a team that did well and was active, or just was active, doesn't matter if they did well or not. If you're on a fun team, you enjoyed DLC. Very consistent. That's the biggest relationship that there could be. So consistently, people enjoy the teams that they're on if they enjoyed DLC. Also, the other factor is what the players have to do during the DLC. And usually that means what maps there are to play, like how good the maps are dictates how good DLC is. But it also means what we made them do as players. So if I forced people into doing stuff that they don't want to do, then they're not gonna like it, and they're not gonna really want to do that again. So I have to be very careful about the kinds of things that I ask players to do during DLC. I don't want them to do things that are unpopular, or otherwise they'll be like, well, you know, maybe I'll sit the next one out. Or if it was a little bit too much, if there is too much to do, they don't have that much time or something, they don't want to get burned out, anything like that. I'm basically just trying to be more friendly towards that kind of stuff, and allow for a lot of these kinds of people to participate regardless. Plus, a lot of people just like different things. Really, there's a large amount of variety in the kind of stuff that is included in DLC. So people tend to like that. They don't like all of the same kind of stuff. They, you know, even if it's something that people like, the people that don't actually like it, because there will be some, will be like, oh my god, boost maps again, or wow, another look at all these normal maps that I can grind, I hate that. They really will say that. I can't believe there's so much normal stuff. I need something that's more different. But ultimately, there's a lot of things that people can like about DLC, and it's a little challenging to try to include a lot of that because there are a lot of different things we've done before. So DLC really has built up over a long time. This is the 9th one. We've done a lot of different stuff, but we do see the same kinds of things happen. For instance, people do not often take initiative when it comes to trying new things. So things like challenges, not that many people are actually going to initiate challenges unless I do something like assignments. So if you don't have to do something like an invert key, for example, then a lot of people just kind of default to, well, maybe I won't do it. I don't have to do it after all. And gradually you start to realize things like, oh, well, you know, our team is actually scoring based on earning keys, and more people on the team who are already participating are telling more people like, hey, you should participate too, and that's good for us, and it gets more people involved. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that it tends to be led by the few that actually are willing to kind of try out that stuff. But even for that, there are always things that will be misunderstood. I do a lot of different things in a lot of DLCs. This particular one, I believe I didn't do that much that was very different. There were certainly some things, but I would say there was not very much at all that was unique. So only a few things that I'll get to apply to that. But let's, you know, building off that, how people view DLC at the moment. DLC really is just the event. It's the main event for the Dust Force community at this point. We've done 9 of them. It's consistently the most active times for people to play Dust Force in the community. It is kind of funny to me to see people share things like the Steam end of year hours played Dust Force per month, and there's always these big bumps in the DLC months, and it really reflects that. Like the even the Steam stats don't lie. So that's kind of neat that DLC has had that much of an impact on the game and the community at this point. So it's pretty cool. But because of that, there are a lot of expectations when it comes to DLC, and that puts a bit of a burden on the kind of stuff that I can or should be doing with it. And that mainstream kind of approach definitely is beneficial for those reasons. Not pushing too hard on the players, not being too intense. But because a lot of people in the community aren't really that competitive, I tend to have to stray away from things that are actually competitive and just kind of be like, well, you know, you can be competitive if you want. It's just that although this is the event for competition really is just, it's not for everybody in the community. A lot of people play DLC stuff just to do the keys, for example. And they'll participate on their teams to the extent that they can. They're just here for a ride. It is great when there is engaging competition, and we enjoyed some of that this time. But not everybody's coming to DLC for that, which has its pros and cons. So all that in mind, all of the things that we've come from, you know, this is the 9th DLC. What's the plan for it? What are we gonna do with the 9th DLC? Well, we're gonna use the same format as DLC 6 and 7. So I established pretty early that this year I planned to have one unique one and one standard DLC, and in this case it worked out pretty well, because this standard format is something that is familiar to a lot of people. It takes a lot less effort for me to put on because I've done it plenty of times before. I don't need that much help for logistics for something like that. There are a lot of people that know how it works by now. So I can bring back a lot of the normal expected kind of things in DLC, and people they'll be okay with it, you know? They'll just be like, all right, well, that's cool. Like, that's reliable. I know I like this kind of stuff. I'll just do what I want. I know it's not going to be like too stressful, but it is a kind of big thing. So there is a lot if I want to dive into it. One of the first ideas that I had for DLC 9, outside of the standard format, was the invert maps. So this is something that I knew I was going to do in following DLC 7. So as past DLCs have gone before, every now and then people like to they like to combine plugins on levels, like let's do stuck no air charge, or let's do fast pogo, or room pogo, or any other kinds of stuff for challenges. And well, unfortunately, Dustkid doesn't support combining plugins for leaderboards, so you have to manually track what your PB is, and then it's a bit more of a hassle to handle. It's a little bit weirder to manage when it comes to DLC. I can't automate it. It's just something that people have to take care of themselves, and it allows them to be creative, which is nice. And there aren't too many people that do that, but they often have fun, and it's fun stuff to show off when they do combine these plugins together for challenges, for pretty unique kinds of stuff. Well, in DLC 7, I was like, alright, well, for the next DLC, I know what I'm going to do for inverts. I'm going to do something a little bit more wacky and actually combine the plugin scripts directly on levels. So now, just instead of taking a map from Atlas and then putting a plugin on it and saying, alright, well, no one's played this before, now I really know that they've never played this and this and this before. because the level doesn't exist until I release it. And even better, because I'm putting scripts on levels and essentially just re-uploading the level, that allows me to hide replays on it. So I knew that I wanted to do that when DLC 7 was over. That's something that I didn't tell people that I intended to do because I wanted it to be a bit of a secret. Because, you know, it's nice to have surprises for DLC when we can do it. You know, that way people can be like, oh, okay, this is what we're going to do this time. Now I'm sitting on plenty of ideas like that. You know, little twists for future events. That's a good one that we finally got now. I don't think we can do it all the time, but that's one of the main ideas that I had from the start for DLC 9. You know, when I'm thinking about how I plan a DLC, I'm like, all right, well, it's gonna be like this. What kind of twists do I want there to be? Like, what kind of theme do I want everything in DLC to be shaped around? In this case, for DLC 9, I'm thinking that it's gonna be pretty standard. So I want it to have all of the same kinds of things that people expect out of a normal DLC, but, you know, just a little bit evolved. You know, there can be changes to little things, but like with this invert map idea, it's just a little bit more involved. Now, this invert map idea, technically, I planned on doing it for DLC 8, but I cut it from that because DLC 8 already had its own little identity, and it didn't really need inverts because it got a little bit... It would have been a little bit much. DLC 8 originally had the idea of... so you have the characters for roles, so every round you would pick who is in each role, and the characters are the roles, so you got a man player, girl player, etc. Well, one of those roles could have been you have a person that plays the invert key, or side leaderboards, or something like that. I considered that, and eventually ended up deciding that that wasn't good enough, and I'll just use the keys for DLC 9. So that's what we did for the invert maps this time. Other cool ideas. A few things. So first of all, the DLC 8 style bounties. This was successful in DLC 8. DLC 7 had a different kind of bounty style, which was basically just racing to do the inverts. Everybody loved DLC 8 style bounties. So I'm like, alright, well, I wonder if I can make that work for DLC 9, a standard DLC that has only a few teams. Well, if these teams are, if there's only like 4 or 6 teams, they're pretty big. So actually I could split them up into groups within those teams, and they would have enough people on their teams to support multiple bounties. So I could have like an easy one and a hard one on a team. And let's say I make the hard one worth a little bit more than the easy one, because I want to encourage a little bit of balance between the two, which has a couple complications that, you know, I'll get to later. But, you know, basically the idea is I want to have DLC 8 style bounties. That's one of these shaping ideas of DLC 9. I want to split the team into a couple groups, you know, 2 or 3 groups. There could have been 3 tiers of bounty groups, but I obviously decided that that would have been a little bit much. It also depended on how many teams there were. So if there were 6 teams, I definitely wouldn't support 3 groups of bounties, because that's a lot of people that don't actually want to play bounties. In DLC 8, I kind of made everybody have to play bounties, but I know that not everybody actually wants to play bounties. So it's a lot more optional this time. And I kind of guessed that maybe about half of people wanted to be on bounties, which led me to, you know, what ended up happening. I also want to bring back level dropping. So this is something that we used to have a while ago. Like we've done different iterations of this before, but kind of forgot about it for like DLCs 6 and 7, and we got to bring it back. But there's an idea to like how exactly do I want to balance teams around how much I'm dropping levels on, like how much do people have to play. Now I know that I could actually so basically what I'm trying to describe is sure, I could just drop one level per player, but not every player wants to actually play 5 out of 6 levels. Some players, in fact, many of them, don't even really play half of the levels that much. So why am I still making them play 5 out of 6 levels when like half of the people in DLC aren't even gonna grind that many? So then there are always like a few people that do actually want to grind everything. So I don't think I need to balance. I don't think I need to have different requirements, or I don't think I need to have the same requirement for both groups of people. Also, there are people kind of in the middle where like they're not the few people that grind the most, but there are definitely some players that grind most levels. But, you know, they're at least active, unlike say the bottom half or so of people. So this kind of idea, you know, it's sitting there for like a while, and I'm just like, how am I going to address that? I want this to be reflected somehow, and it's a bit complicated of a problem. It's one of those core ideas that can shape the scoring system, but I'm not really sure at this time how much I want to commit to it, because it can affect a lot of different things. Like we're talking about changing how scoring works fundamentally, and I'm not even talking about like what we did or what we tried. I'm talking about this idea can fundamentally alter how scoring can work. But in theory, it matches more how people actually plan to play. And it addresses balance issues between teams if I can, you know, correctly reflect that. So in theory, the teams that have the most or best or, you know, most active players, or even some players that are really good but you don't expect them to play that much, these teams get nerfed if there's a system like this, because I'm assuming that only a few people can count on just about everything. Some people might be able to count on most levels, and then half of people might count on half of the levels. So if I incorporate a system that kind of puts a cap on how much people are able to contribute, and I do that based on how active they are and, you know, how optimal it is for their team, then the top players can really only do this much. And sure, they're doing a lot, but the other players don't have to worry about everything to the extent that the top players do. So there's a lot of possibility in how you can shape a system kind of like that, and I don't like the idea of like making players that are on the bottom count for as much as a top player. Like you can kind of cap the top a little bit, but you can't multiply the people on the bottom, because what that ends up doing is just rewarding inactivity. And I don't want to incentivize inactivity. I want people to actually play. But I'd rather them, play what they want to play anyway. So there are a lot of different ways you can go about these kinds of ideas. It's just like, it's just kind of floating out there. How do I want to address it? And it needs to take shape somehow. Another benefit of this is that it allows people to focus on only a few things rather than the dominant way of approaching keys, which has been established in DLCs 6 and 7. The dominant way to win DLC has always just been have a more active team. And that's enjoyable for the teams that are more active. But it's honestly not very interesting. It's not very competitive. It's not fair. We can only do so much when drafting the teams, but it's a bit of a balance problem that could be addressed and has been a thing ever since I've adopted this kind of DLC 6 and 7 standard style of scoring keys. So if just getting keys counts and every single key counts, then just have a bigger, more active team and you're gonna win. And I don't really care for that. That's not very interesting or competitive, like I said. But the thing is, that's pretty engaging for the past DLCs. If there's enough effort put into the team creation process, then it ends up being fine. It's never perfect, but it's never really been pushed to the extent where you run into those, well, in theory, a team could abuse this for these reasons. We've never really had an obvious winner for any of these DLCs like that. Which, when I'm talking about like an obvious winner, I mostly mean like how it feels during the DLC, not what it looks like after you see the scoring. Because the scoring doesn't reflect how close it actually is a lot of the time, because like it'll go up in value over time, and also if you just win a few swings, like if you just barely win a couple swings in a round, that's a lot of points. That's a lot of team points. So it's not always the perfect reflection of how the DLC actually went. Like, just winning by a lot doesn't mean it wasn't actually close. And we saw that in 3 rounds this DLC, where it was fairly close all 3 rounds, and it was pretty interesting. But let's return back to, if I have this level dropping system, then how am I going to decide what keys are going to get dropped? And who is okay, so if I have activity tiers, which, like, if I'm going to call these activity tiers and people are in a tier of activity, just kind of reiterating that aspect of it, then how do I decide who is in which tier? Does the person that gets 5 wood keys become more valuable because they got 5 keys than a person that got 2 red keys? Technically, yes, but it depends on where these cutoffs are. So if the cutoff is like, if it's like you only count for 2 keys or you count for 4 keys, and there are only a few people on your team, period, that can count for 4 keys, then the person that gets anything more than 2 keys will always outplace a person that only gets 2. Because, you know, that 3rd key adds to the team value more than 0. So that just kind of makes sense. But you know, is 2 red key or is like 2 silver keys better than 1 gold or 1 red? Like, where do I draw the line for that? Well, because that's complicated and just awkward, the only real solution to this is I have to tie point values similar to DLC 5 to the keys again. So each tier is worth a point, and that's how I compare how good each key is. That's how I can decide who is going to be dropped and who isn't. Now, if I assign key values, or if I assign point values to different keys, then that ends up placing extra stress on how balanced the keys are, and that's something that I can't guarantee. Like, there are going to be some easier red keys. There are going to be some easier gold keys. I can't do anything about that unless I had infinite preparation. I definitely don't have that for DLC. So I kind of just have to take my chances and hope that they line up reasonably well. And some variety, some variance is good. Like, it's good to have a couple that are a little different, but I don't actually want there to be any that are that game breaking, because it's just not fair. It's not good design. It's obviously not intended, but it's a sacrifice that I have to hope doesn't actually get sacrificed too much. Also, I have to split standard and invert scoring, because I can't just combine those anymore. You know, how much is an invert key worth? How much is an invert plus worth? I gotta decide somehow, but they're not worth the same as like a gold or a red. So those kinds of decisions ended up leading into how I structured the team scoring. Because I have to think about these kinds of complicated systems. And they're interesting to think about. There are a lot of factors at play, but I don't really get too much engagement from other people about these kinds of systems, and you know, that's just kind of the way it is right now. One of the only other kinds of ideas for DLC 9, the final thing in the DLC 9 plan was the schedule. I just wanted to release everything at once. Yeah, so there's obviously pros and cons. I don't know how it'll go, but the general idea is, instead of releasing things at different times during a long 10-day round, let's just release everything at the start of the round, and maybe people will pace themselves, maybe not. The only downside of this is that I have to rush teams to make maps more quickly than normal. But I don't see that as a problem, because I know I can handle that. So that's really the 5 ideas for the DLC 9 plan: standard format, invert keys, DLC 8 style bounties, level dropping but more dynamic, and release everything at once for the schedule. So how do I need to prepare for DLC 9? I have this big plan. Well, honestly, I just need people to make content. It's not that hard. I just need content. and there's a lot of content that's needed, but fortunately I don't really have to worry about logistics. I already know how it's gonna work. I've done this before. I know what's involved. Yeah, these are all of the kinds of things that I needed for DLC 9. Logistics wise, there's really just like, gotta make another spreadsheet. Alright, well, I'll just copy DLC 7's. So, pretty straightforward. Same kinds of announcements. But this whole process of map making, I want to say that this took about a month and a half. Usually it's about a month. So usually I will ask map makers for pre-made maps about 1 month in advance. And this particular time I asked a little bit earlier than that because I wasn't exactly sure how busy I was going to be during September and August, because I was just busy with other stuff, you know. I anticipated being busier than normal in both August and September, and because of that, I just wanted to make sure that I had people on board. So how it happens is I'll reach out to a bunch of people, usually DMs. Sometimes in announcements I'll say I'm looking for map makers. Occasionally people will respond to me, but that's basically how the pre-made maps get recruited. I send a DM and I have a few little restrictions in there sometimes. I might have themes that I use, but in this case I was pretty laid back with the requirements here. So kind of like DLCs 6 and 7, I was not very strict with what kinds of things can happen within the maps themselves. I only tend to check things for like I only tend to check things for like, do you have bad dwarfs? Or do you have horrible gameplay at certain points in the level? You know, just looking for annoying strats to grind. Because when maps get played for, you know, 5 or 10 days, however much it is, then they really get played to a significant level of play. You know, the strats get very refined in a short amount of time. So I want to make sure that people aren't like hating actually grinding strats. And that's something very hard to do because Dust Force is something that is pretty technical and involves a lot of hard execution. This particular time I asked about half of levels to remove fit boost for some reason. So somehow people were complaining about things like ceiling bonks in levels. Just ended up being the thing that people were like, oh, I noticed that ceiling bonks exist this DLC. Well, they should be happy that they weren't complaining about there being a fit boost in every other map, because there really almost was. And I tend to suggest away from certain kinds of tech in map in map design, because like they just if it's the kind of thing that someone can be like, I always reset at this point because of reason, and it's like a tech kind of thing, like, oh yeah, I gotta hit this heavy and I'm gonna reset like half the time there. Well, some people aren't gonna respond to that very positively. They're gonna be like, man, I hate having to hit this heavy, you know, I hate these prisms, I hate this heavy, I hate this dust, whatever it is, you know, this dust sucks. All right, well, just remove a little dust and then people can usually hit it, and then they're not going to reset at as many points in the level. because you're not forcing them to do horrible stuff anymore. So yeah, the ceiling bonk stuff, that was fine to me. You know, from my perspective, I was just like, all right, well, you know, it's optimal in a lot of situations. It is kind of funny that more people are noticing it. But at least it wasn't like slope reversals or fit boosts, you know, that kind of stuff. Because people are not going to enjoy having to grind that. You know, think about it like, if there is a Jorf that saves, you know, a second, if a Jorf saves a second in a level, in a DLC level, then it's a lose-lose scenario in how it gets perceived in DLC. It's a lose for the people that go for it because they're like, this is fast, I gotta do the fast thing, but I'm gonna fail it 95% of the time. So people don't like having to play that kind of stuff, and they will complain about having to hit a Jorf in a run because it's the fast strat. People that don't go for the Jorf, that also want to participate and like get keys or be competitive, when they don't go for the Jorf, they now have a losing scenario of, I'm just losing a whole second because I'm not going for this clearly dominant strat, and if I just went for it, I'd have a better time, but I wouldn't enjoy doing it. So I hate this level because I'm not going to do that Jorf. You know, I don't want to do the Jorf. It's just not enjoyable for people on both sides of that issue. Well, it doesn't have to be just Jorfs that follow that line of thought. This is applied to every single kind of difficult to execute strat in any level, no matter what. So if you're only hitting this attack 10% of the time, sure, that's a little bit better than a Jorf, you can argue, where like you can use 5% as the example that I gave. Okay, well, I'm hitting this attack twice as often as a Jorf. Isn't that twice as good? Well, no. And there's no real clean kind of measurement for any of that stuff. It's just something that isn't going to be desirable for people actually playing in DLC. So let's not have that kind of stuff in DLC maps, because I am forcing people to play these levels. You know, if I'm forcing people to do this kind of stuff, then I have to be very careful about what's in them. If they're not forced to do it, then you could argue that sometimes there's reason to have a little bit of that. And that's a very different kind of topic, that, you know, that we're talking about things that are optional. Just because a Jorf can be optional in terms of like, all right, well, in this invert category, there can be a Jorf. Well, the Jorf can still destroy the balance of an invert key, and that's often undesirable. So I still will intend to shy away from that, but this particular DLC in these invert maps, I did a little bit less of that than normal. And, you know, we'll kind of get there. But as far as these pre-made maps are concerned, I only had a few things that I brought to the map makers, and they had like a month to a month and a half to do all this kind of stuff. I just check in a few times occasionally. I'm like, hey, are you gonna hit this deadline? Like, I really don't want to be working on these levels during DLC. Please don't be working on the level during DLC. So I tried to enforce September 1st as a deadline, and that ended up working better than it ever has, honestly, for this DLC. Almost everything was finished within a reasonable amount of time, this specific DLC. And I'd say that it's probably the most successful pre-made map planning that's happened, other than CC5, which that one I expressed a lot more control over that process. This one, I'd say it was more due to like me really pushing that I wanted them to be done significantly earlier than the real deadline, and you know, just kind of pressuring people in DMs and stuff, and the map maker channel, and being like, hey, you got another map? You got another map file? I want to check it. But you know, it's just the role of a producer ultimately, which isn't that hard to do. But this time it happened to work out pretty well. I'd say that in terms of following the schedule, not that many people made me wait on the maps. There are definitely still some that had issues, but you know, that's what the extra time's for. So if there are still some that have issues, and I tell them September 1st, and then they're not quite ready on the 1st, but I can, you know, I can say stuff like, hey, well, I needed this map on September 1st, how much is left? And then really get them to cleanly say things like, okay, well, just finish this and then you're good. Most of the time that ended up working out. Pretty much all the maps were basically done before round 1 started, which was good. But that's just in terms of like scheduling the pre-made maps. When I contacted them, I usually start with like, hey, do you want to make map for this? If I have secret info, I don't say the secret info too early. In this case, the secret info was very, very light. The collaboration map theme. I ended up coming up with this theme because I knew that I was doing the invert maps, and they were already combining more than one plugin in each level. So I'm like, okay, well, we're combining stuff. Okay, well, you know what? Camel and I just combined a level last year. That was pretty neat. I don't want people to exactly do that again because that's a lot of work. But let's just have them collaborate on a map. That's not so bad. Let's pair people up. Let's have map maker pairs on each of these levels. So after they agree to this, which is I need a 12 to 20 second map or a 30 to 35 second map, 30 to 45 second map, and some of these maps should not have spikes for round 1. Then the the group ended up figuring it out. Who was doing what pretty well. People found their partners, all that. I ended up getting more map makers than I normally do, and I had more maps than normal. There were 12 total pre-made maps, and I was ready for 6 or 9 or 12. Has to be divisible by 3 because that's how many rounds there are, and then the number of team maps that I get has to be whatever that is. It has to relate to whatever that is. So the more pre-made maps, the fewer team maps that I need to worry about. So that's just in terms of standard leaderboards. In terms of invert maps, so I already knew I was going to have these invert maps, and I knew there would be invert keys on the pre-made maps, but not team maps. For the invert maps, we'll just come up with as many as we can think of. And in this case, we ended up coming up with 12, which ended up fitting the number pretty well for what we wanted. We'll use what we get is usually how it works. In terms of the amount of content in this DLC, DLC 7 had the highest number of stuff in it. This is basically the same amount of stuff as a DLC 6, where there are 10 maps total each round. DLC 7 had 7 leaderboards and 5 additional invert maps. Pretty sure. Or was it 4? Either way, DLC 7 had a lot of stuff. DLC 6 only had 6 standard leaderboards per round. I knew I wanted 6 standard leaderboards per round. And then I ended up with 8 inverts because of how many invert maps we ended up having. So these invert maps came from leftover ideas that Ukkies and Camel and I had pre-DLC 8, and mostly Ukkies and I came up with the remaining ones and put them together. But it's kind of hard to think about good combos of these ideas. Just find maps that are out there and put scripts on them. Gotta think of something to do with them. Maya the dog, looking for attention. Yeah, in this case we're just talking about invert key maps where you're doing weird stuff on the levels, like pogo, rope dart combined. So that's just what we had this time. The final kind of thing, bounties. That's the only other kind of content in this DLC. So maps are obviously a lot, but you know, we still need bounties as well. And the bounties are pretty challenging to come up with. I wanted to get at least someone to help with them. In this case, that was Skyhawk. Also, I can split the for the purposes of testing bounties, I can also split groups and kind of predict like, oh, okay, well, you guys are in the hard bounty, I can have you test the easy bounty because you're not gonna participate in that. So that's something that we made a little bit of use of, but you know, tried to get a lot of the bounty assistance from Skyhawk early and really split up where all of these things are coming from. So it kind of removes me a little bit from the process where like the pre-made maps, I'm not making any of the maps myself. I'm just kind of the producer role. I only have to worry about logistics, like, you know, getting everything together and stuff like the spreadsheet announcements, any information that needs to go out, stuff like that, you know, just preparing all of that normal kinds of stuff. Those kinds of things that put it together, really just what I'm talking about. But you know, that kind of stuff, all fine with me. I can do all that and just oversee the rest of things. Pre-made maps, I got plenty of people on those. Invert maps, Ukkies is coming up with a lot of those ideas. We got some from Camel as well. And if needed, then I will insert myself in any of these things. I do end up needing to do that a little bit more on the inverts because it's hard to think of ideas, and we do have to just make the maps. But making these maps is not that hard. You only really need to do a little bit. And then the bounty ideas, kind of hoping that Skyhawk can come up with a few, and we'll trade ideas at some point. I'm gonna go talk to Maya for a little bit. Alright. So yeah, bounty ideas. Kind of hoping that Skyhawk can come up with some of that this time. And we'll step in when needed. So that's really the content preparation. Some people asked about how that works. That's pretty much how it goes. The other thing that people also wanted to know about was how the teams are put together, which is the other main part about how DLC is put together, how I have to prepare for DLC, because teams are vitally important to how the DLC goes. So this process varies. I do a lot of different styles of DLC, but for this type of DLC, this more standard style, what we've found is most successful is a kind of unusual way of handling the draft system. So we've done different things before, like even DLC 1 had a public streamed draft, and captains just pick their teams in order, and that's kind of hype. It's nice to show off that kind of stuff. But there's really not that much control that you can have over that kind of process, and if I want to be more careful about the teams that are put together, then I want to make sure that I don't alienate certain kinds of groups of people. Like, some people want to be together, they only want to be on DLC teams if they're with someone specific. That kind of thing is very common in terms of how people act on DLC teams. I want the teams themselves to feel natural together, that they have some kind of similarity together that isn't just they're on the same team. I want tight-knit teams because well, if they're not tight-knit, then they're not going to enjoy DLC that much. So as established earlier, people tend to only enjoy DLC if they have a team that they want to be on. So teams are very important to that process. And what we've kind of settled on after doing this a few different ways is this kind of process where in the sign up form, people sign up and they have requests. Sometimes I will ask things like, does anyone want to nominate anybody to be a captain? Do any captains want to volunteer for this captain role? But what I find most successful is I will pick groups of co-captains based on who wants to team together already. So people are going to register, and on the registration, they'll say who they want to team with. So for example, let's say JVC wants to team with Arb and Jake. So like this particular DLC, someone like that will on their form, then we've got like, all right, JVC wants to be with Jake. All right, well, that'd be nice. And hey, guys, look at that. Jake also put JVC up there. Those two people, I could probably form a team around that group. I'm gonna make them captains. I'll ask them first, but assuming they say yes, then they will be captains and they will be free to talk to each other and figure out who else that they want on their team. So these are all based on what I receive in the registration forms. I'll make groups based on that. Sometimes I get a lot of them. This particular time, I'd say it was probably the least amount of requests that I've seen on the forum so far, which is kind of interesting. That was the case. A lot of people are just kind of okay with whoever they end up with, which was nice. But it made picking captains pretty challenging, because I just kind of had to figure out some groups of 3 that made sense, and that's not always easy. Now, after I have enough groups of 2 or 3, however many teams I feel like I can support, this time it happened to be 4, the captains can make requests themselves. So captains get to see the requests that other people have made. They get to come up with a big list of all the people that they want on their team, and I tell them, just list whoever you want. It's okay if you list someone that someone else wants, because we'll talk about it later. And then things will happen like, oh wow, everybody wants Cow. What a surprise, Cow's popular. You know, there's some popular people out there. A lot of people want a lot of teammates. So I get all the captains to do that. Then I get them in a call together. They agree on these requests, usually starting with the ones like, wow, all these neon white people want to be together for some reason. Alright, well, no one's contesting that. Let them be together. After all, they probably aren't going to do anything if they aren't together. So let's just let them be on the same team. So we can do that sometimes. This is the kind of time that we can do that just fine. And half of Team V Ceilings 9 is already made up, turns out. You know, they've already drafted half of their team before we even really start to agree on other things. But people will agree on different amounts of requests. You know, different captains will request different kinds of things, and we'll try to group people together with the people that they wanted to be with anyway. Like if 2 people are friends and they signed up and they only want to be together, yeah, we're gonna put them together. But I technically can't guarantee that this always happens. You know, there could, in theory, be a triangle of people that, you know, someone wants to team with somebody, but they don't want to team with someone else, and that's not reflected with what someone else wants. So I do have to break up some of these groups occasionally, just because, well, balance also matters too. But ultimately, people agree on these requests. They then pick the remaining people with balance in mind, usually paying attention to things like how active we expect people to be based on how active they said they might be. Honestly, just a guess anyway. And there are other factors that captains care about too, but turns out they don't really prioritize balance that much, and they'll often pick according to their preferences anyway. And that's fine, but it's kind of weird when one team is trying to win and another team is like, well, I only want people that aren't gonna play. You know, then I have to step in and be like, okay, well, you need more people that can play. I need to move this person over here or something else. So as we're picking remaining people and doing all this, then afterward we do finally, you know, talk about what the teams are. You know, are we okay with these exact lists of people being the teams? Does anyone have balance issues? Does anyone think that these teams are unfair? Speak up now, because, you know, if you're not speaking up, then I'm assuming that you think that these teams are fair. You know, making sure that everybody, all captains there, they all agree that they think that this is as fair as possible, and that they're happy with all of the teams, not just theirs. So whenever I do these kinds of drafts, I emphasize that at the end, and then no one speaks up anyway because they're, you know, too quiet to do so. But it doesn't really matter. They like their teams. But that's the goal anyway. The goal is you have to make sure that the teams are tight knit, and if they're not gonna like their team, we gotta change it. So yeah, they do have to speak up. I am expecting them to participate. Yeah, it's a group process. I try to get as many people involved on that side, but in practice, it's still quite a struggle. I find it very challenging to actually come up with 4 core active groups of people in the Dust Wars community. Every time that I have to come up with teams, I always struggle to come up with just enough teams. It's a very big challenge to get people that kind of glue together teams. There are not that many very active people in the community that I can reliably see leading a team to be together. And that's something that's very challenging for a lot of teams. That's the reason why if a team doesn't have people like that, then it's just gonna be awkward. It's just gonna be quiet in there. This time, I would say that 3 of them had a little bit more cohesiveness for that, obviously. And one of them, I'll talk a little bit more later on about this, kind of soon, but one of them didn't really have as much. Pretty obvious. But the thing is, that final team, Alice Apologists, despite just kind of lacking in terms of being as cohesive, it was still fine. It was still within the kind of allowance of they're not spiraling out of control and all hopeless and very negative over there. A lot of them are still enjoying DLC to the extent that they're willing to put in any effort. It's just that it wasn't as much as the other teams. So although it seems like it was negative for them, it wasn't actually negative for them if you're on the team. They had a lot of fun, they just weren't as competitive, and they didn't have as many competitive people. So I thought it was a little funny that some people commented that they thought it could have been balanced better, but they weren't on the team that they thought needed to be balanced better. So balance is tricky. The team enjoyed what they did. They were fine with it. Worry about your own team. Try to win if you care about balance. Unfortunately, though, they didn't really try to win, and I find that disappointing. But that said, people draw attention to unbalanced situations and don't like it. I don't want them. Balanced DLCs are a rarity. In the sense that you ever get a close fight between teams, that isn't really that common. There aren't that many people that are trying to win, but we have done a good job at it the last few DLCs. In the past, it's been worse regarding that. Ever since we've done team creation and stuff this way, I have seen significant improvements in how people perceive teams in DLC. It's not even a question whether I would do this again. Of course I'm going to do the draft exactly the same way next time that we do a standard DLC like this. There's just no downside. Well, there's one kind of downside in that the process isn't as public, and this is a little complicated for a few reasons. I don't like making people's private preferences public. So sure, some people will request that they want to be on the same team with someone, but at no time do I tell them that these requests are going to be made public. They do know that the captains can see that, or they can assume that the captains can see who they want. But I don't share anything about who doesn't want to be on a team with somebody. This isn't very common that there are requests like, I don't want to be on a team with Fishy. I hate Fishy. He's horrible. Whatever. That'd be a horrible thing to say, obviously. But why is Fishy out here catching strays? Well, if someone actually didn't want to be with a person, then they can tell me. They can tell me privately or in the forum, and I'm not gonna tell the captains that. So I will only make clear those kinds of things if they end up needing to influence certain things. But I have a lot of discretion when it comes to making people's preferences public, or even sharing them with captains. So, for example, I don't talk about the feedback that I get in the general feedback form a lot, because I make it very clear on that you can say whatever you want. I'm not going to share this with people. I tell them this is private. I'm not going to make this public. And if I'm going to make it public, I say answers will be public. I'm very careful about that kind of stuff because I don't want someone to say something that they didn't think would be public. And I treat the draft process with that same discretion. So there are some benefits to not making it public, though. One very important one is it allows rebalancing before I actually announce the teams. So it allows rebalancing during the draft as well. So if as people are picking teams and they're like, well, hold on, why do you have all of these teams have these people, but these teams have like no top players at all? Throw somebody this way. Give us Fishy. that kind of stuff. And yeah, we gotta figure out balance somehow. I noticed that you guys aren't really picking anybody that can play the game. Don't you think you should pick someone that is gonna be active? So it's a fun process, but unfortunately it's not something that we can share with everybody. It's just a more laid back situation. Also, the way that we handle how people are chosen in the draft, because people aren't chosen like a normal like snake draft and you choose them in order of like, well, I'm gonna pick the top seed first and then the second seed and then the third seed, because that's not how it works. It's really easy to misconstrue, like, oh well, you kind of got this person in the 5th round. Well, that doesn't mean that they were your 5th pick, or that they're your 5th best player, or anything else along those lines, really. We're just trying to move people around kind of as they get claimed and be like, all right, well, ordered roughly by how much impact we think these people will have on teams, which is a matter of like skill and like how much communication you'll have with them, how active they are, if they're going to help other people on your team, if they're going to contribute keys, are they even going to play one of those rounds. There are a lot of those kinds of things that just kind of get summarized into how much team impact that they can have. And there's like, you know, there's a bunch of people that are recommended, like you should probably have a few of these that'll have high impact. And then there's a lot of people that are kind of in the middle. And then there are a lot of unknown people that we don't know how well they're going to do, but they really could be anywhere. And you kind of pick people, you know, a little generally from top to bottom, but it goes all over the place. And then as it happens, you're just adjusting with other teams. And you're like, well, it looks like your team is really active. You got to pick some people that aren't actually going to play. Every single draft, we got to tell at least a couple teams that. Because, hey, you know, some people are trying to win. That's fine, but, well, why aren't these other captains trying to win, right? So, sure, it's fine, but I do kind of wish that captains would be a little bit more careful about that when we do that. But it's a very difficult kind of thing to do. And then finally, like, you don't even know if, like, the way that you think it's balanced is even going to be balanced. You know, I always warn people a few things as they're picking their team and when it's over. I always tell people if I think that there's a chance that their team can kind of negatively spiral downward in terms of activity, and there was a very high risk for all teams in terms of, like, you know, all your teams are really big. You're gonna have to, you know, be that glue that gets them together. You're gonna have to convince them to play some levels. But, like, what are you gonna do if you get last in round 1? Are you guys just gonna give up and not really play? Are you still gonna participate? Team Delo Owns did a really good job of, like, they actually got last in round 1, and they almost made the biggest comeback. You know, they were neck and neck in rounds 2 and 3. Team V Ceilings 9, I warned them. I said to Idle, I was like, I think you guys, you know, all these Neon White players and all these other people on your team, there's a little bit of a history of, and some of them have kind of lost interest over time in DLC. How are you going to combat that? Are you going to be able to keep them active throughout DLC, even if, like, you know, let's say they get last in round 1? How are you gonna handle it? I don't think that they would have handled it like Team Delo Owns. And I do think that they lost momentum when they lost some of those coin flips in round 1. But, like, they definitely suffered after round 1. And although you can say that, like, some people got busy in round 2, yeah, sure, that's a factor, but I don't think that's a good enough reason a lot of the time, because you can still have priorities. Like, if you guys won round 1, then you're not just gonna give up in round 2. So I think I think that not being in first is certainly something that affects teams a lot. Fortunately, Eyes on the Fries had that you were in first place buff the whole time. So you continuously were able to encourage teammates to, you know, get more keys, do more on this. We're doing so great, guys. And teams that are doing well in DLC always have that buff. And it's a wonderful kind of positive feedback loop. People love being on those kinds of teams. It's always great to see. You guys had it pretty much all DLC, and you were able to pull it together each round. You made a lot of little comebacks along the way, but still ended up working it out most of the time. Yeah, it's really hard to get people to play. like that. But if you want to win, then you know that's the way that that it works in these kinds of DLCs where it's participation driven. But people tend to have fun when they win. And since I named all the teams, then you know, Alice Apologists. They obviously were the team that kind of appeared to spiral down into last, but really just in comparison to, say, Team Della Owns, who was actually last in round 1. Team Della Owns picked it up. Alice Apologists just kind of didn't. You know, they just kind of did the same amount, other than Uki's not really doing much after round 1. So, you know, they just didn't have as talkative or as encouraging of a team to try to participate. They just like to do the things they like to do, and to not get in each other's business about it. But if you want to win, you got to get in each other's business about it. That's what separated the teams at the top. Yeah, you can see in chat, like, you know, it had to be done. What else is here? I also don't like telling people what could have happened because it's not important. It didn't happen. No one cares, you know. Teams could have been different. Yeah, so what? They weren't. This is the way teams were. Also, you can't just fix a balance issue with little swaps all the time. There's a big difference between, like, how could we have possibly balanced this team? Maybe this person should have been on this team and all that. Well, we don't know how a person would have acted differently if they were in an entirely different team setting. For example, someone that's extremely active on Eyes on the Fries would not be active on another team. Because the other teams just didn't appeal to that player. That's fine. So you can't really look at a DLC and think things like, well, you know, maybe if teams were totally different, it would have gone differently. Well, I mean, yeah, it would have been different. But we're talking about like 1 out of 20 people on your team. We're talking about a totally different team at that point, a totally different competition. I also don't like telling people like what could have happened in the draft too, because it really does just kind of taint it. There's really no other word for it. Like the expectations just get kind of ruined. You're like, oh well, you know, if this change didn't happen, then this person would have been here and here, like that could have happened. Well, I don't like telling people that they should have been on a different team or anything like that, because one, they never were guaranteed on that team that they could have been on the first place. They were only picked for a team when it got announced, because, you know, the captains know that there's still time for things to change, and they understand that, you know, you want somebody but you can't always get them. Requests can't always be these guarantees. But you know, that kind of stuff doesn't sit well with me ultimately. You know, that's not how it works. You know, stuff like seeding, that's not how it works. It's just a different kind of draft system. And also, we seem to handle the late signups pretty well, but you know, there were like 8 people that signed up after the teams got announced, which was abnormal. And I can't always support it but I managed to be able to do it this time, and it kind of worked out well enough without upsetting things, fortunately. But I don't really like late signups after teams are announced, because now I have to pull all the captains back in, and then they have to re-agree to everything that happens. So how did DLC actually go? Well, somehow we keep getting bigger. There were 99 people who submitted replays on DLC 9 levels, one away from 100. There were 4 people that signed up for DLC and were on teams but didn't do anything at all. At least a couple of them were active in the chats and just chose to do nothing. But 99 people, 99 unique players across all DLC 9 levels. Pretty impressive number, honestly. That number keeps going up. It's a lot of Dust Force players. Pretty good bounce. There was good competition each round. There were some contending teams, and only one team was a little bit less interested in that. I already talked about it. The rounds having the staggered releases, schedule-wise, led to more stagnation in ways that I feel like people didn't really notice. So, in particular, this kind of pushed the team scoring to the limits. And it was fortunately still close, but what I mean by this is like the way that key scores are tallied, for example. You're really pushing for everybody on your team to earn more and more and more keys or more points. And if you have such a long process, if you have 10 days to play levels, that's a long amount of time to develop the meta for each map. There are only 6 leaderboards. 10 days is a long time for each of those. You really don't need that much for developing a competitive leaderboard. And a lot of people only play for a certain amount of time. So it's nice that it's flexible for all of these people. And people express that they like this flexibility and leniency for the schedule. But in terms of is it okay to have 10-day periods and all this stuff that you can just do at any time? It's questionable to me. It pushes the limit. I personally find things more interesting when there's less time to do it, because there's a lot more variance that can happen if there's less time. You're not gonna figure out, say, the Aurora route within 24 hours necessarily. Those kinds of things become a lot more stressful, obviously, but it's a lot more interesting, and there's more variance that can happen. So if it still takes you a week to figure something out, well, if the round was only 5 days long, you maybe didn't figure it out. And I think that's more interesting because there's more variety that can happen. But that said, the burnout was a little bit less apparent, and there was a lot to do, and it was over a long time. So I'm talking collectively speaking. There's always some amount of burnout that happens from DLC. Some people go pretty hard. But I found it interesting that, to me, and also represented in how much people are still playing the levels, because you can see it in the stats. The people are still playing the levels. They're still engaged over that amount of time, which is interesting. So we seem to do a really good job at that. DLC definitely still the event You know, we did it again. Another pretty good one. A lot of people reflecting positively over it. But I'm not here to talk about the positive stuff. We'll talk about a lot of stuff. The maps were well received. The team maps worked out pretty well too. They were able to handle the low amount of time pretty well. It was a little bit stressful to, you know, get them all finished at the right time, but not really, because I wasn't really that worried about it, honestly. It just worked out. The maps were mostly shorter than I expected. So I said earlier that I wanted pre-made maps to be 12 to 20 seconds. I'll have you know that so there are 12 pre-made maps. 3 of them are the long maps, which were recommended 30 to 45 seconds. And I tell them, like, you know, it's not a big deal if you go a little bit outside it, but, you know, probably don't go on the long end of the longer maps. We really don't want those too long. But, you know, it's not a big deal if you're a little bit shorter sometimes. Well, the long maps are fine. They were all in those mid-30s for where world record was. For the 9 shorter pre-made maps that were supposed to be 12 to 20 seconds, 4 out of 9 maps had world records that were lower than this requirement, and 1 map had a world record that was higher than 20 seconds. And that was also the only one that went over 15 seconds. So I was a little bit surprised that we ended up with as many shorter maps, but you know, that's just what people made. That's just what happened. They weren't intended to be that short, but hey, well, that's what we got. They weren't too short though, so ended up being okay. I was just, you know, I'm trying to give people the ability to make 15 to 20 second maps, and there were none. Everybody was like, well, we actually want 10 or less to 14, and only one of them was over 20, and it wasn't even made for that purpose. So like Temp's map that preceded both Dual Surge and Tempe's Caveway, so that map was obviously only one map, and then we decided let's just split it, and then we got 2 maps out of it. Perfect. You know, that's how we'll fill these 12 map slots. We'll just split that one in half. Thanks, Temp. So yeah, it worked out. I just thought it was kind of funny that half of, you know, over half of them weren't in my, you know, soft requirement. But it was fine. The invert maps didn't have anything like that, obviously, but they were pretty enjoyed by people. They were more played than normal inverts normally are in DLCs. So, you know, if you look at the stats, that I'll show some of this later, and you know, it's already up in the DLC stats sheet and also the DLC 9 leaderboard sheet. There's a bunch of stats already in those sheets already. More people are playing these invert maps than people playing inverts from Atlas maps in the past. I think it has to do with their new maps, so people are probably going to try them out. But the thing is, the people that were playing them were still in DLC. So there was only like 1 or 2 total replays. Actually, no, I looked at this earlier. There are 4 total completions on invert categories across all of DLC 9 from people that were not on teams. So out of all 30 maps, there were 4 completions on invert categories, which are the invert maps most likely. who are not those teams. So it's people that are actually in DLC that are still playing them, and the numbers are going up for those. So that's cool to see. I thought they were going to be a little bit less liked compared to other times, but people seemed totally okay with the let's do wacky stuff. Obviously, not all of them are popular, and people prefer different things. It's always been that way. But generally speaking, it does feel like a overall positive kind of feeling about how these maps went. People understand that they're not for everybody, and that's okay. It also helps a lot that they're not all required now, but it's that's just how it worked out. We're not gonna do things that weird all the time. We just decided to do it for this DLC. Next time we'll probably have slightly more normal inverts. I don't know. But there's certainly a place for it now. We know that we can do it. We can certainly get away with some stuff. The pacing of maps was pretty good, aside from both the pacing and the variety of gameplay in maps was pretty good this DLC. There weren't too many comments on that overall. But the funny thing was that characters were imbalanced for the rounds. We had round 1 was 5 out of 6 worth maps, and then we had 0 worth maps for round 2, and then it was even again for round 3. That was just a coincidence. I remember seeing that when I saw the what the list was shaping up to be, and I was like, well, I'm curious how that'll go. But I had to make it clear when round 1 was over that don't worry guys, these aren't always going to be worth maps, because worth haters do come out. But pretty good variety across the maps. I don't control for this very much, but I do a little bit. So there were, I think, 2 instances this DLC where there were maps that were being made that I was like, hey, what if you didn't just make something non-linear? One, because people don't actually like non-linear maps when they have to play them. And 2, we already have enough of them, trust me. The map makers didn't really look at each other's maps that much, but they were at least receptive to those kinds of requests when I give them. They're often like soft requests, like you can still make what you want, but I think you should do this. And sometimes that gets followed, sometimes it doesn't. I tend to, in this DLC, I left it a lot more up to the map makers themselves. Except for team maps, I don't give them that much control because they don't know what is coming. They don't get to know as well. But I have to exercise more control over the team maps because I just have to be strict with them. Like I need to make sure that the maps are reasonable to play. There's not much time to do it, just make me a normal map, don't do anything gimmicky. Trust me, there are enough other gimmicks in the level that you're gonna hate. You don't want to hate another one. But obviously they're not gonna hate the other stuff. It's just that I don't want anyone to hate the map that you're making. So let's play it safe with just these maps. There isn't that much time, just trust me on it. That's all the map stuff. See how much I wrote about bounties. All right. So for bounties, there was only one standout idea this time. I was saying earlier, I've said it plenty of times now, that the only bounty I really had in mind that was even considered for last DLC was the map making one. And so obviously the premise of that bounty was make a map and then other teams have to play it, but surprise, you got to play it first and make sure it's accessible. So I can actually get 2 bounties out of that whole ordeal, and it comes with its own little twist in there, which is more of a delivery kind of thing on my end, as the person, being the game master of sorts in these more personal bounty sessions. I can do that in these kinds of settings. This was the only one that I had anything kind of like that in mind. So I guess let me talk about each of the bounties. I'll do that at some point here, but hard was intentionally very hard this time. I wanted to see how much I could get away with, because I know that there are only 4 teams, and I know that only the people that want to be in hard are going to be in hard. I'm going to encourage the best players on each team that want to be on bounties to be in the hard bounties, because I'm telling them it's going to be hard. So let's see what we can get away with. I had so let me kind of back up for a moment. So for how bounties themselves went in terms of design, I didn't end up getting as much help from Skyhawk, unfortunately, as I expected. We had some different plans for what we wanted to do with bounties each round. I'm obviously not going to tell you what other plans are, because I might use other ideas in the future. But I unfortunately didn't get further development of those plans, including the map making one. This especially, that's the only one that really required development. And I didn't really get many other usable ideas working with Skyhawk, unfortunately. He just ended up busy, and it's something that, although it would have been nice to involve him more, it just didn't work out for him. So unfortunately, because I'm not expecting to do too much on DLC 9, I think of time is obviously the commodity. It's the resource. Like, I can spend my time preparing for DLC 9 doing some stuff. I can't do everything. I need to split up all of the tasks among a lot of different people, like map making. If other people are making maps, I don't have to make maps. And I'm assuming that I'm kind of busy already in this month, and well, I had to, for DLC 9, work more on coming up with invert ideas and coming up with bounties. So those are the 2 categories that, although I didn't want to have to be involved with them as directly as I was, I ended up needing to spend more of my time doing those things. And that also includes making the Nexus, or making more invert maps. Any of that kind of stuff. Like, I have done things like that before in other DLCs, and it's usually pretty obvious. If I'm busy during a DLC, then there are some things that I can pay attention to, and there are some things I can't. If something needs to happen, then I have to focus on that. I needed there to be a Nexus because there was a relay bounty that ended up happening. So because that ended up happening, then I can't focus on the key times for round 3. If like I'm already prepared with my stuff, then I can focus more on this aspect than another one. So in DLC 7, because I was working on Yin and Yang, there was no Nexus for DLC 7. That kind of stuff happens. So for this particular DLC, I ended up needing to focus more on invert maps and bounties, and can't focus on other things quite as much. So some of these bounty ideas, they really are just hard to come up with. It is very, and I'm talking about DLC 8 bounties, by the way. So in DLC 8, we had very unique kinds of things that you've probably never seen before. Maybe even outside of Dust Force. Stuff like being able to control all 4 characters with the same inputs in the way that we did it in DLC 8. Something you've probably never done before. And I like to do very unique kinds of things like that if I can. Hence, the map making bounty. That's something that you can't do in any other scenario, and it works very well in this specific scenario. There's a lot of good synergy in its design. That's why that one's easily the most popular one this DLC. Follow the leader works very well in a bounty setting where you're playing the game differently in a way that you wouldn't normally be able to do, and you can't reasonably expect people to follow these kinds of rules on a leaderboard, because you can't actually measure something like turn off your monitor and to be coached by someone else, and it's only the first time that you ever do it. So that kind of stuff's really cool when we have ideas for it. The one that I liked for Follow the Leader this time was the mirrored one. So I at least did manage to test those with Skyhawk. And to us, there were 2 options. Like, do we want to do the leg or the mansion, short version? So like the 2 of us did mansion, and we did it with the flip when we tested that level. And when we did the leg, we did that one with Pogo, just the 2 of us, no one coaching us. And we're just talking about like, okay, well, we can only kind of get away with this once, if we even try it at all. We have to go in not too prepared in order to set the stage a little accurately. There's only so much stuff that we can really do, but I feel like this will be good enough for these bounties. And we're just kind of throwing these ideas together kind of near the deadline, because there's not really any progress being made beforehand that I was hoping there to be. That's why I tell people to have early deadlines. That way, if needed, I can step in and either do it directly myself or get more and more involved. So that's what was necessary for bounties this time. And that's how the round 1 bounties worked. Where, okay, well, we've got like, 3 or 4 ideas of things that we could do like this. We kind of just need to find something that's good enough for some of these. And that's not really how I like to do something like bounties. But by that time, I'd already announced that like we're gonna do that kind of stuff, which I don't normally do, but people are excited for bounties to return. So what I will stand by, what I should have done, is I don't think I should have done bounties this DLC, because they weren't prepared enough for my liking. There was only one that I had in mind, and Similar to why I didn't do invert keys in DLC 8, where they didn't mix well with the format. Bounties, in this case, they just weren't prepared enough for this DLC, and they would have gone better if more prepared another time. But that said, I don't think that they were negative. I just think they could have been better. I don't think it was worth doing it, personally, because I have higher standards of these kinds of things. But I didn't want to cancel bounties, and these ones looked good enough where, you know, I could probably pass it off. So, it worked out. I think it was fine. A lot of people do still like them. Some people say they like the DLC 8s more. That's fine. Those are different kinds of bounties. These are different kinds of bounties. Very different settings. You can like different things. Some people probably also like DLC 7 style bounties. There are definitely people out there that like them tied more towards actual invert keys. That's another way I could pivot to them in the future. If in this case, and I'm not as prepared for it, I could certainly do something more invert key like with those bounties, where they just get released at a certain time. In that case, and whoever gets it first gets it. But the asynchronous bounty idea, I think that's worth continuing whenever bounties can happen, at least. That's a very good concept to keep. Just schedule when the people can do it. But because these weren't very prepared, I allowed them to be a little bit longer in terms of like hard can be longer than it previously was. There's only so many people that are gonna be there, but this time for some of that kind of stuff, it's just a little bit too hard. It happens. It was intentionally hard. But the problem is that in bounties, and this has been ever since bounties started in 7, not just in 8, people will always doubt themselves. Like, if you make one mistake in a race in any possible way, you're like, oh my god, it's over. I can't believe I died on level. Or, I can't believe I missed the ledge cancel on this level, it's over. It didn't upset the SS, actually, but I lost 2 seconds on this. Run's over. We lost the race, guys. Well, that compounds a lot in these live bounties. So that doesn't feel good. And if you don't get to know the results for a while, that feels even worse. So although it was suggested that I delay the results, I have mixed feelings on whether it was a good idea to actually do it. I did it because I might as well see if people have an opinion on it. I do a lot of things just to see what happens in DLC, after all. But there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stuff on the line. It matters a lot. Bounties were they were worth a little bit too much, in my opinion. This time. I didn't need to have them worth as much, but it kind of lined up for, looked kind of elegant for how things worked out. But, they were just, in retrospect, it's easy to say, bounties were just worth a little bit too much. That added to the pressure. The amount of time probably took a little bit too much time. The hard ones were probably a little bit too hard. Now, in terms of things being too hard, though, a topic that I find very interesting and really want to consider for the future is, is it okay to allow people to fail? I think there's a lot of nuance to how this works in a DLC style setting. I think there can be a place for it, but it depends on the format. You know, DLC, it always depends on a lot of factors. Well, in a format that you are not expected to fail much, it feels really awkward if there's only one kind of thing you can actually fail at. And then when you do fail at it, it feels even worse, especially when it's, you know, built up, and, you know, as important as something like bounties. You know, all of the things that point towards it being more important and more of a big deal, and, you know, all these factors come into play, and then you just draw attention to, you know, the ability to fail something. It doesn't feel as good, obviously, especially when a lot of DLC is like participation awards, which isn't competitive at all, and whoever gets the most participation awards can win sometimes. Well, that's kind of weird. So there are mismatches in design philosophies there, so that's why there's a disconnect. Now, if DLC were shaped differently, or if it's a different event altogether, obviously, it can obviously be more okay when someone fails. Like, if you're getting into something and you know it's going to be hard, and you know that there is a high chance you could actually fail. There are different kinds of settings that you can get into that allow for this to be the case. It's something that I want to explore in the future, whether DLC or another kind of event. It's something that I'll have to think about quite a bit. But I plan to talk about that a little bit more later. I've got a good section for this a little later. Because hey, I take my time with these. I really do just ramble sometimes. What else is there to say about bounties? I actually got all this and didn't really look at it. Easy and hard, I realized much later that I should have just named it main and side. I realized that in like round 3, I was like, I should have just called it this. And this is after like months of me thinking that easy and hard wasn't a good naming convention for the bounties, and not being suggested anything from anyone else. But finally in round 3, I'm like, oh, that should have been main bounty, side bounty. Because I tried to make it very clear that easy wasn't easy, and I just couldn't communicate that. You know, I hated that I had to call them easy and hard and didn't have any suggestions for them. Talk about scoring. Scoring was a little overcomplicated at the start. The activity tier system that I ended up with, yeah, it was more like hard and harder. But, you know, it's all in retrospect. That's what these are, postmortems. The activity tiers didn't really work out. I wasn't able to develop that system as much as I liked. Could have been put under more scrutiny by myself, and I could have thought ahead a little bit more. But, you know, that's just what happens sometimes. I could use a little bit more feedback during the process when I ask for it as well, I think. But the activity tiers were only awkward when I had to try to explain them to people, which was kind of funny. Because when I simplify it, it makes a lot of sense. You know, the people that are most active count on more stuff. people that are less active don't count on as much. And I automate the scoring process. But it gets complicated. And I don't think that the system itself is inherently flawed. But I think that I think that there were things that contributed to how it worked, and how it happened, that it just continued to build up to me and reinforce why I still didn't like it. What ended up happening was, there are a lot of factors, of course. You know, I like to break these down into a lot of different reasons that, you know, I'm not just reading off my notes. You guys can see it on the stream. Like it's just annoying to have these kinds of systems that seem overcomplicated, and you know they kind of are, but you know they reflect this thing you want to happen. They just don't do it well enough. As a way of saving face, because I didn't want DLC to continue like that, you know, even though it didn't really affect that many people, there were two things that I was trying to address here. One is, let's make it not look complicated, and two, let's just let people not worry about it. You know, they don't have to worry about something that's different than normal. So I ended up pivoting to the same kind of system that we've used in the past that I previously expressed plenty of issues with. Like, you know, you just win if you get more participation awards than someone else. But it's close enough to what the intent of activity tiers were like in the first place, where it didn't really matter. Like it didn't really affect things too much. So it's just complicated to describe the details behind it, I guess. Like the reasons why I changed it, and you know how it actually works, and all that kind of stuff, which is obviously a flaw in the system. But you know it was just inconvenient for a lot of reasons. And by pivoting to something that was more familiar to people, that made good enough use out of the systems that I intended, it just kind of worked out, you know. People bought into it very quickly. They understood it. It's a good enough system. We've used it successfully before, and this has the little activity, like it already has level dropping built into it already, with like now you count on 4 out of 6 keys, count on 5 out of 6 leaderboards. It makes sense that leaderboards are for the more active people, so the people that want to count on everything, they can get leaderboard points, and they don't have to worry about, you know, how much exactly they count on if they're playing a lot of stuff. Because the leaderboard thing, you know, it doesn't really, you know, that 6th level doesn't really come into play that much until you get to the actual top level. For keys though, the people that are getting keys, that really is just for participation, and I don't want that to be as dominated by the people on top. So I shouldn't let the people that are on top also score so much more for keys just because they are also the most active. So by lowering the cap on the top, and bringing up the bottom, I invite the kind of problems that are from the past, where, you know, everybody now counts for 4 out of 6 keys on standard keys. But, you know, 4 out of 6 isn't that bad compared to the past. So it went over really well. You know, all things considered, this was very positively received when it comes to people's like responses to the system. A lot of people are like, this is my favorite way that keys were handled for a variety of reasons. They'll pick like, you know, totally different reasons why other people are doing stuff, and you know, that's their favorite reasons for why keys are better this time for them. But the problem is, you know, it's not perfect in my mind. It is abusable. It gets pushed to the limits, and it is unreliable to balance unless I have a lot of help on actually coming up with the key times. So there are still a lot of things I want to fix about the system, but I think that the things that I explored this time were generally positive for the future development of what I do with keys. It's pretty safe to say that some of this stuff will carry over. You know, I'll just approach it a better way next time. I was able to save it mid DLC this time. That's you know, that's good enough. But I do want to consider simplifying this kind of stuff or redoing it in the future. I like to make big changes. So although I have an idea of where I can go for this style of, you know, this direction of scoring, I really do want to reconsider as well. You know, it'll give me new ideas, allow me to try out something different potentially. We'll see what happens. There really is a lot of stuff going on in DLC now. So there are a lot of categories that you can score in. It's a little confusing, you know, how you can contribute as a newer player to DLC. And you're like, well, there's leaderboards and keys and challenges and all this other stuff. What am I doing? And, you know, how do I even know how much I'm counting for? That's where the complications come in. And that's what I want to improve significantly. So that kind of thing has only built up. It's built up more and more over time, and to become more complicated. And it used to not be quite that complicated, but now people are just kind of used to this complication. It's just not good enough. I consistently have these kinds of issues that I'm wrestling with before each DLC, and I'm like, oh, I don't really like how this still works, but I can't think of anything better for it. And challenges, the perfect segue, really highlight this the most. I do not like how challenges work. This has been my #1 things I wish I could fix and change somehow, but I'm not really getting good enough ideas here. And I'm not getting enough help from people during DLC to do things like assigned challenges, where in the past you know, could sign up for, or you could just be assigned some challenges occasionally, and there are a lot of different ways we could interpret that or do it. It is a way to get people doing things that, you know, just involves more effort on the side of the people running DLC. But I haven't come up with any other solutions since DLC 6 for things to do related to challenges at all, and they really just kind of have stayed. But I think that, you know, this time for sure enough is enough, and there's no way that I do it again, right? Because if challenges don't get attention, they're not performing the way that they're designed to perform, and it's just a very clearly flawed system. Challenges are designed around people actually being in challenges and wanting competition. But a lot of people don't actually want that much competition. And there are a lot of reasons why people don't do challenges. They don't take initiative. They're unsure who to challenge. There are only so many people that want to initiate them anyway. A lot of people are just generally not interested. But some people will do them if you assign them to one. In fact, a lot of people are okay with being assigned these kinds of things, but it requires a lot of overhead. And I would only trust someone that actually can like be in my kind of position in DLC, where like you have more knowledge of all of the teams, and like you're able to basically just play matchmaker, where like you can see the team channels, you can see what the teams are going through at these times, and you try to come up with appropriate matches between the teams. I would like to have someone in that kind of role in order to run challenges in DLC like this again. I don't think it's worth having challenges in DLC unless there is something like that in place. But I'm not always able to handle it myself. And sometimes I've tried to encourage captains to be more involved. DLC 6 was a very good example for how I would like to do this kind of stuff. But then it hasn't been reused since. I've invited captains to be involved in these ways. But I'm always just kind of feeling it out, and I don't pressure them into doing it. I saw in this DLC that captains were not really that interested in it, and I'm just like, yeah, well, I'm not gonna push. I'm not really that concerned about it. I'm just gonna hope that challenges don't get abused. Fortunately, they were not abused, and they ended up pretty even. So I didn't have any problems with that as far as challenges were concerned, but the system obviously requires either change or significant attention. So I still do not like the way they worked out, but there are a lot of people that can have fun with challenges. Let's talk about difficulty in DLC. And this is a very general kind of topic, but it's something that I want to talk about. So when people are talking about difficulty in Dustforce, they often refer to a few things. Traditionally, it means map difficulty, like, wow, I died in this map, it's hard. In DLC, it often means, when talking about how hard a level is, how hard is it to execute grinding the level? This boost map is hard to play. Sure, it doesn't kill me, but it's really hard to play this kind of level because it's so execution demanding. But DLC has an extra kind of difficulty added on, which is difficulty to reach a kind of goal. In standard keys, usually this gets tied to red and golds the most. Invert keys, obviously both inverts and invert pluses are different difficulties. And bounties, obviously this time we had harder bounties for the hardest bounties. So when I'm talking about difficulty, when I'm talking about difficulty for any of the following stuff, I'm specifically talking about the goal requirements, like keys, coming up with key times, and I'm coming up with how hard bounties should be. So difficulty does always vary, and it is always it's always just a guess. It really is just me anticipating how hard I think it could be for a majority of people in DLC. We got 100 people who are going to play stuff, and I think that a certain amount of them should be able to earn this key. Or, you know, I want reds to be hard, but not too hard. I want golds to be a little bit easier than that. I want wood keys to be accessible, but still an appropriate challenge for people that are kind of at the bottom. You know, not actually too hard, but reachable for people that are actually new at the game. And maybe they can put in some effort on a level or two and earn a wood key. But it's hard to balance that kind of thing. It's very difficult. Ideally, you would have a consistent way of, you know, having this difficulty even across the board, but all the levels are just so different from each other that you really can't, without spending an unreasonable amount of time or effort looking into these levels, you can't come up with this system because you're probably going to miss something. And also, the more you do look into something, it takes away the appeal of just letting people figure it out. You know, the kind of surprise that can happen when it comes to, like, well, let's just see what happens. You know, people are gonna figure out some strats on this level. I don't know what they're gonna figure out. Let's just kind of see what happens. Well, for a level like, say, Rootfall, you start in the middle of the level. The level is a circle. You can go in any direction. It's very non-linear when it comes to that. That's a level that is very difficult to come up with appropriate goals on it. Because you can't just look at it and be like, all right, well, you just go this way and it's going to take roughly this amount of time. And then when you have good enough execution, it's going to look like this for a red key. Well, in Rootfall, you now have to do that for every possible route that you can think of. So if you were to test a level like that, you have to spend a lot of time looking at and looking for every possible route and timing every single route just to prepare for keys. Fortunately, I had a lot of help for Rootfall, specifically from Maso, on any of that, so I didn't have to do very much of it myself. But most people don't actually do that for their overwhelmingly non-linear levels, and most people don't really care to do that either. I will ask people, like, and you know, this isn't to throw them under the bus, but there are very obviously some people like Camel out there that do not really appreciate playing those kinds of levels, and he's made it kind of obvious before. But if I were to ask Camel to come up with a red key on a level like Rootfall, it'd just be like, nah, I don't want to do that. I'm not interested in that. I don't even think I'm gonna play that level when it comes out, in fact. So, you know, fortunately, Maso is on Rootfall. But for levels like Why Not Saucilies, and that one's Cow and Idol, working on it. Well, I asked a lot of people, hey, I need something from you on this level. I asked a bunch of people that were in the map making group. Don't get anything from Camel, as established. To get basically like times in the 9.8 to 9.9 range, give or take a bit. And you know, I'm just like, well, I also don't really want to do this, and I'm busy doing other stuff. So I'm just gonna hope that, you know, this is an okay time. And then everybody's just like, yeah, that's fine. Whenever I involve them more in the timing aspect. So I get very, you know, you can imagine that I'm giving people skeptical looks when they're the ones saying, yeah, that's fine. Because I'm never really just like, I think it's fine. Often what I want to do is just make it a lot harder. Like me personally, my preference would be, yeah, let's just push that really hard and then hope that people are able to get it. But that's not really popular for keys, especially on levels like that. So I always have to make the more non-linear keys a lot more lenient, and I just kind of hope that they don't get too broken. Fortunately, we've avoided that for the most part, but you know, Why Not Saucily is kind of borderline on how much I let it happen. But there are a lot of different ways to perceive difficulty of goal requirements on different styles of levels, and you know, that's just one example. Coming up with a good enough kind of red key time on a non-linear level, it's challenging. I got to involve more people, potentially, hope that they're able to find some stuff, and hope that it ends up kind of balanced, because this particular DLC relied more on the keys being kind of balanced. I don't like how it worked out. I don't really care for that. But you know, it's not really it's not just about what I like. It's about, you know, being engaging to a lot of people. So I would say that it still worked out fine in terms of how it was handled. But in an ideal kind of system where you do have enough testing, where you're not really like ruining the level, but you're still getting enough info that you need, and if you're coming up with reasonable goals, then the system could work. And then there are interesting choices that players have when it comes to, I'm not just going to drop the hardest level, which is the most predictable one. If there are 2 levels being dropped and there are 2 clearly harder levels, most people are just going to drop those, and that's just the way it is. If there are 3 levels that are considerably harder than the rest, and you only drop 2, you know, I'm talking about invert keys, well, we're going to see a little bit more choice happen in the levels that are dropped. Not much, because it's still not ideal, but you know, that's how it works in practice. So, you know, how can I possibly solve this? How can I reach a more ideal system? Some people will say things like, what if you did more testing? Well, you know, that's great and all, but I'm not going to guarantee that testing is ever going to find everything. No matter how much testing you put in, it's not like an infinite amount of time and you're going to find everything. You're still probably going to miss something here and there. There's more testing, in quotes, you know, that goes on within the first hour of the level being released and available to everyone, and they're actually putting up times on a leaderboard, than all of the testing that goes on meaningfully in terms of red key timing beforehand. So if I had reliable testers or more testers, I could certainly approach something a little bit more like that. But I'm very strict when it comes to, like, what if I just got more testers? Well, if anyone ever wants to be a dedicated tester for DLC, if anyone ever expresses that to me, where, you know what, I'm okay with knowing like all the secrets and, you know, just testing all this stuff and coming up with times and any of that kind of stuff, then I don't really trust them. I don't think that they're actually going to put in that much work, because what they're describing is something that's a lot more intensive than even participating in DLC. And I'll be upfront about that. Hey, wouldn't you rather just be in DLC and do this on a team? You know, hey, wouldn't you rather just do a little bit less effort and just be on a team? Because if you're gonna be a dedicated tester, you're gonna wish you were on a team and you didn't have to do this much testing. So, you know, that's what I'm trying to describe, where it's really not worth it to me as a tester, unless you're doing more work than me. But we've had, you know, this is the 9th time we've done this. We've had keys for a long time now too. We introduced those in DLC 4. So we have a decent idea of where the keys should end up. And that idea, it works. You know, it's good enough. Like I've said, things really are just good enough a lot of the time. But in that kind of way that we've built up these expectations of, you know, people expect the keys to be at a certain skill level. Something that I don't really agree with is the idea that people kind of feel they deserve to be at a specific level of skill. So, for example, let's say someone thinks that they are good enough where they deserve, and a very important choice of words here, they deserve to earn, or not earn, but they deserve to have golds on all the levels. You know, they think that they should just be a gold level player, and they should get gold on everything. Maybe sometimes a red key. You know, I should get silver on everything with this amount of playing. I very much dislike that kind of entitlement when it comes to levels of skill in something competitive. I really don't like that kind of line of thought, because the idea that you can be entitled to something like that and not have to put in some amount of reasonable work for it, when there are a lot of other people that are also getting better at the game, and you know, this is the 9th DLC now. People are getting better, believe it or not. It's reasonable to expect that red keys should also increase in difficulty, and gold keys should also increase in difficulty, because people want a little bit more challenge. I can't just have everybody earning red all the time. So the idea that someone kind of deserves all of the red keys, well, I kind of wish that the top level of achievement could be a lot more appealing than someone feeling that they, you know, they don't have to work for it a certain amount. So I think there are a lot of dangerous lines of thought when it comes to how people can act around these kinds of expectations. And I think that the exact same line of thought also applies to things like invert keys and bounties. So, you know, the idea that you expect bounties to be finishable, well, that's a nice expectation to have, but maybe I don't always want you to be able to finish the bounty, right? You know, maybe I just want you to get a high score. I don't expect you to finish everything. That wouldn't be interesting to me if you could just always finish everything all the time and always reach these goals. Because if everybody's reaching the same goals, I can't really make much good competition out of that all the time. That's also not interesting at a high level of play. Me personally, me as a player, If I were active in DLC, I would not be very interested in reds and invert pluses because they're not that hard. Like, you know, the red key times, to me as a player, the amount of work that I would need to go in is unfortunately just not very, it doesn't compare well to the majority of other players. You know, it's not an interesting goal for me. There really would need to be like an invert plus 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 that like it really pushes the limits, in my opinion, because they're just not interesting goals. And I would like there to be harder goals in DLC as a player, where sometimes I just don't, you know, I have to work for them. Sometimes I don't always achieve them. Because the only thing interesting to me would be like, all right, well, I got my perfect sheet of, I earned all the reds, I earned all the invert pluses. Well, I'm not really interested in earning more. Yeah, I didn't say invert plus plus, I said 3 pluses. So, get that right. But the point stands at like, I wish that there's something like, you know, I want to give a key that someone like Fishy can consistently kind of aspire to challenge that key. Because like, to me personally, like me speaking as a player, I'm not interested as much in the like trying to get world record on stuff, but I would be more interested in trying to get a very cool kind of key, where like, you know, if we're just assuming that it's not just like get world record on levels, you know, I like pushing the limit of like, yeah, I want to find something really difficult and I want to try to get this time. But it is unreasonable to come up with those kinds of goals for red keys, obviously. But, you know, we're talking about something harder than red. Because, like, I'm saying that I think red keys are expected to be too easy, is what I'm implying, by the way. So, I personally would like reds to continue to push harder, you know, slightly harder as time goes on. And I've made them like a tiny bit harder on average. But when they end up being harder, they end up being less popular. Because people are like, well, red key's just hard on this level. And now I don't like this level as much because I didn't get a free red key. And sometimes I have, admittedly, used red keys as bait to try to make people play levels. Because I'm like, well, you know, you don't have to play this level that much. You can just stop when you get a red key. Also, I am not always fully involved in choosing all of the red key times. Well, what I mean is I'm not always as invested in every red key. There are some red keys that I express more control over than others. So, for instance, the pre-made levels in round 2, I had more time to test those ones out myself. So the pre-made levels in round 2 were a little bit harder red keys, it turned out, than the other ones where I just kind of trusted other people a little bit more. And, well, it turns out that most of the ones that I did more choosing myself ended up harder. You know, what a coincidence. But that was just a matter of like, I know more of the strats, therefore I should, or I would put red key here. You know, because I know more of the strats, I'm going to assume that there are still some strats that I'm not aware of yet, because I didn't really play the level that much. You know, there's still plenty of room to go up. That's why there are more tiers in red keys. So, for the ones that I tested more, it was pretty consistently in the... People didn't really go into Red 3, or they didn't really, or they didn't really get Red 4 as much, and they didn't, or there were not as many people getting at least Red 1. Another very important factor of this particular DLC was also that everything was more optional. So when some stuff is optional, you don't have to do every level. The hardest stuff does tend to more consistently be dropped and avoided, not just dropped. So people are okay with not getting all of the keys to a certain level. But like, there's a lot of territory I want to explore with difficulty in DLC, particularly as it relates to goal requirements. I think there's, I think I can explore this a little bit more in the future. I'm not sure what I would do. I'm just getting some ideas out there. This is less how DLC 9 went and more like, conjecture about other things that could happen. So, kind of teasing possible ideas, you could say. Maybe there's gonna be a hard DLC. I've said that plenty of times, but not done it. Alright, well, let's look at some stats. Hopefully everybody did their map polls and all that. We got those all in. Because we're looking at those responses. Alright. Wow, there were 25 responses this time. Favorite map? Nothing over 50% on this, but Forgotten Cascade with 12 votes. Dual Surge 11. Pretty spread out. Favorites for almost all the levels, except balcony bolting and a few team levels. Slightly better favoritism for you can still do the poll, by the way, but I'm just looking at these results now. The poll's in the announcements channel. You can also do the feedback as well. Just this is where it sits right now. And at some point I'll add it to the DLC stats sheet in like a day or two. But yeah, it's too late for the ones. This is just the favorites at this point. So, favorite map, Forgotten Cascade in the lead. Best gameplay, actually 3-way tie. Forgotten Cascade, number 4. Interesting to see these be split like this. For each of these questions, people are allowed to pick the top 3, their top 3. They're allowed to pick up to 3. They have to pick 1, 2, or 3. Aesthetics is actually the only one that has one map that's more dominant, which I find kind of interesting. There were really not many standouts for aesthetics on these DLC maps this time. Not really a big surprise. But I mean, there are only 2 maps that got over a quarter of the votes. So it's no wonder that most of the votes went to both of those 2. So really, this is a level kind of standing out this much sometimes says more about what it's standing out over that there weren't that many other things that people could call favorites. But that doesn't, I don't mean to take away that much from Ray of Hope or Dual Search. I personally was not really that, impressed by anything I saw in DLC 9 quality-wise, kind of across the board. But there's certainly solid levels. But we didn't really have any crazy standouts, in my opinion, this time. There are only so many levels you can really put in a tier of their own. So, not trying to say they're bad levels, just, no surprise crazy levels this time. Yeah, people gotta step it up this year for map making. Best invert map. This one had votes for everything. No majority this time. A lot of laser fans. This is what we normally see on the polls. This was actually the DLC that's had the least amount of time to make team levels. And the pre-made maps had even more time than normal. Favorite invert key, we got one hater, but very spread out again. Really no strong favorites here, but really going to show how people like a lot of different kinds of stuff, and you get a vote for your top 3. So something could just be 4th place. We had 2 maps without votes. This time it was Kid Dash Macro and Katamari Lair. But yeah, every single one on this list probably has a hater. There are people out there that don't like boss mode. What a surprise. But of course you can still vote. Yeah, people voting for no jump is kind of surprising, but I mean, it's only 24%. They probably just voted for the easiest ones, right? Some people's favorites are just the easy ones. Bounty's got votes for everything. This one also had more vocal haters on the mathematical one in particular, but there are also plenty of people that enjoyed it. And at least 3 of them is their favorite. But there was really only one standout for the bounty this time. And people like relays. Yeah, out of people that played mathematical, a little over half were good with it. So, favorite? Hey, no. That's a different story. Best map making team. V ceilings with 1 more vote than Team Delo owns. But most people think it's not V ceilings, so take your 40% with that grain of salt. See what map feedback there was. Reverse ledge cancels and ceiling bonk fans galore. Let's see what we got. Got a lot of fans, not enough worth maps. Someone's coming around to stuck no air charge. Could read these in order. Someone liked the longer maps and the shorter maps. And also didn't play bounties, but didn't play the hard bounties, but had an opinion as a viewer, which is valid sometimes. But yeah, bounties cannot have very much testing, turns out. Otherwise, they then are no longer secret. So, as established, there's only so much testing you can do on some stuff. There are a lot of fans of the invert maps. Some of that comes through here. Good variety of maps. Balance of maps fell off to one person. Probably talking about character balance but maps had enough diversity. This one, unpopular opinion, but we always get a little bit of appeal there. And then when we do this kind of stuff, people hate it. So I always have to be careful. Yeah, be glad you actually got a kid map this time. Let's see this one. I would have preferred more medium length levels. Drawing in the sections of them. Well, that was the way it turned out. Yeah, I pretty sure I addressed how some of this was already. But yeah, when you have small teams, that tends to affect how much stuff you're gonna know about the levels. After all, you're sharing your replays with a quarter of people playing the levels. Most teams are probably gonna figure out just about everything. And when you have 10 days to play all these levels, well, you're probably gonna run out of things to find levels. There's only so much that you get to explore when optimizing. And it is more troublesome to have very open-ended things and too much of that. So I would much rather stray on, this side than the other side. This person, though, would like longer maps. Short maps are fine, but they do get solved pretty quickly. That really is just the way it is. But that is also okay to have stopping points. That's one of the things that, although I didn't talk about it, that's right at the top of Postmortem. All the way at the top. One thing that's very important to prevent burnout and encourage people to play to certain things is to have good stopping points. That's a common lesson learned that is something probably shouldn't have skipped over too much. Got a bunch of questions for when I get back to this. Why not Saucely's? Too open-ended, almost. Good variety, not distributed evenly. Well, in terms of characters, sure. In terms of style of gameplay, pacing was okay, as far as I felt. Not the best, but, I mean, I use what I get. Alright, for general feedback, so I'll show some of these responses. Half of you played some. A couple of you played a little. No one played none. That's useful to know. Yeah, I expect these people to be the ones to do the feedback form. In terms of how people prefer to contribute to teams, how they want to participate, standard keys and invert keys. That's a lot of key votes. A lot of people like hanging out in VC. Not everybody selected SS though. If any of you guys, want to still do these forms, you can. I'm going to address the feedback that I've received up to this point, but obviously I will still read stuff that people submit after the postmortem. You can do the links, they're in the announcements channel. But there's a lot of variety in terms of things people want to participate in DLC. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. There are some any% fans. I throw it in there just to see. How often should DLC happen? I have two interesting questions here. Now, the way that we did it this year, 2/3 of people preferred that. Only 2 people voted for only 1 DLC per year. And some people just want more normal ones. More ones that are like this. I think it's pretty safe to say that I'm probably gonna keep it to the way I did it this year. We'll keep the even numbered ones unusual and the odd ones normal, which is definitely easy to remember. Keep the odd ones not odd. In terms of months people prefer in DLC, we have a pattern of people preferring the ones that we have been using, which is nice to see. But I have a feeling that, well, a few people probably just put everything. I'd have to look at the results. But, interesting results. I don't really see any reason to change it. I was just kind of curious what people would say. But, in the summer, people are going to take vacations at different times. During the holidays, people aren't always going to be around. So, we have kind of settled on a good pattern, I would say. We've been doing this for a while now. So, I think what we've settled on after 9 DLCs is looking pretty reliable. Pretty good stuff. It works out. I think this is the last one, yeah. I'm not gonna show the other feedback, but let's look at some stats. So, got a cow icon. Cow recently added the team compatibility matrix. One new thing on this sheet to the DLC stats sheet. This is in the DLC links channel in the DLC Discord. If you want to open up this spreadsheet, it's in DLC links, the channel, under announcements. Should be right at the top. Cow has included the team compatibility stats, which now you can see how many times you have teamed with other people. So, for example, Duck and Arb have been on the same team 6 times and 1 time in DLC 5. The quarter points are, they're DLC 5 because you were on 5 or 4 different teams in DLC 5. There are 13 people that have been in 9 DLCs. You can see that if you just go to the DLC stats. You can do things like data change view, how many they were in is total. So we have these players have perfect records when it comes to they have been in all of the DLCs. Perfect attendance. Somehow Dello on the list. You'd never expect it, but he was there. Anti-Hoon, Duck, also, possibly surprises. Have joined teams and really did what they could. In terms of who has the most wins, we got JVC and Dello on top. Both of them not adding to it this time, but almost pulled away with a 5th win this DLC. They made it close. Dello put in a little bit of effort at the end. But yeah, JVC with a good record. Conscious is now 2 for 2. Just like No Face was. And now No Face has a 2 DLC losing streak. So we'll see if Conscious can keep it up. The only DLC that JVC wasn't in was DLC 2. Alex has been on 3 winning teams. So is Heavy. Paul, Northgate as well. There are plenty of people that have never earned DLC wins. But there are plenty that have gotten at least one. But yeah, this is all updated. Player keys tab is working again. It updates every 6 hours now, unless Dustkid has issues. This one as well, we can see who has the most red keys. The answer is it's Arb. Arb has the most red keys. He has all 116. There are 116 of them. Arb is missing 2 invert pluses. Idle, the only other person over 100 of them. JVC's got a lot, Camel's got a lot. Fishy's got a lot, but wasn't involved in a couple DLCs. If any of you guys want to increase your key count, you can do that. This list updates every 6 hours. All of the key counts, all of the requirements are visible in this sheet. But yeah, it would be impressive to be ranked high on this leaderboard. We also have the most invert pluses. There are 2 people that have perfect scores on invert pluses. That's A-Boss and Holy Cow. Arb in 3rd place. Boss has actually got 4th most now. We have, yeah, this really is like another achievements page after all. You can earn your keys and it gets updated every 6 hours. Some people only have 1 invert plus. The 2 invert pluses that Arb is missing include CC5, kill 20 apples any percent. He really just has to just beat it. That's it. Just do a completion of the category. He gets the key. The other one is the Crescent 3 apple SS. which in my opinion isn't that crazy, but not that many people like to do it. You know, there are definitely harder ones that ARP has done, but those are pretty intimidating invert pluses. We also have all the map stats. Well, not quite all of them. These from the map poll will get filled in when you know, I stop getting responses. But we do have you know, the normal responses. We see them get filled in. Dream Flood with the highest average ranking in its round, and for DLC 9 made it into 10th place in the overall list. Dual Surge is pretty close too. Apology Dome not looking so hot, but you know, they all fit in the list. They all get ranked. The levels that had the most replays over here. You get all the data that you want for all these. In this case, it looks like yeah, Why Not Saucilies had the most replays of any had the most valid replays out of any DLC 9 level. Is interesting. There's a lot of key stats, a lot of this stuff, but a lot of this is actually easier to look at in the DLC 9 leaderboard, where there's now a new level stats and a level key stats on the bottom. New tabs. So it breaks it down by each type of keys. There's a lot of stat stuff. If any of you guys like looking at stats, there's a lot of cool stat stuff out there. You know, there's just a lot. Something, a kind of fun fact. If you take the average amount of time that, if you take everybody's average PB time, and then you multiply that by the number of valid replays that you have on levels, then you get a rough estimate, a little bit of a lowball estimate, of how much time is actually spent playing these levels. And it's not counting the invalid runs, it's counting the normal leaderboard valid runs. If you do that, then you get a number of like collective amount of time played across all players, and you know, there's a lot of funny little stats like that. So cool little stat dump. Now, some of you may wonder, how does this compare to other DLCs? And for other DLCs, we have similar pages. So you can compare these kinds of stats by looking at other DLCs as well. It really only goes back to 6 and 7 meaningfully for this kind of stat page. But there's a lot of stuff you can look at. So for instance, DLCs 9 and 7 are pretty comparable. So let's go back and forth between these two. And you can look at this and say that, okay, well, DLC 9 had a slightly lower number of keys that were earned. It had more inverts, but there are actually fewer levels in DLC 9. So it's better to look at things like percentages. You know, how many people are percent-wise earning these keys? Well, 2/3 of people in DLC 9 got invert plus when they earned an invert key. The number was closer to 60% in DLC 7, so you could argue that DLC 7 had a little bit harder invert pluses, or maybe the inverts were harder. You know, there's a lot going on there, so there are a lot of factors, and there's a lot of stats. We have pretty similar kinds of ratios across each of the DLCs. You know, you can draw conclusions however you want from any of that. There's a lot of stuff out there if people want to get into it. All right, well, let's see what's left. So this is a good time for questions. I'll address some questions that I've already mostly addressed. But if any of you guys in chat have questions or want me to talk about something, feel free to bring it up. We're getting to the end of this after all. How do pre-made maps work? I explained that one. I hope if someone really wants that to be explained a little bit more, let me know, I guess. In terms of how I decide who to invite to make maps, it varies. Sometimes I just DM people that I know are more experienced with map making that I can rely on to finish a map by a amount of time. You know, people I've worked with before on events. I prefer to work with more reliable people for DLC because it's kind of the only event that I care about like that. So DLC, I'm much more strict, especially with team maps. Those can be much stricter because I don't want them to be the ones taking chances. You know, I need there to be some amount of control established over, like, you know, some of these maps have got to be normal. I'm gonna have other weird stuff, but people don't want too much of it. Please just make it normal. So DLC, I tend to test a lot of different things. I do a lot of different things in a lot of DLCs. So I need to have some amount of, you know, something like control a lot of the time. Can't test too many things at once. Can't let everybody do their own thing. For things like team maps, for example. Our key times chosen. I think I detailed a little bit that, you know, it's part of the process, but in general, when a map has basically complete gameplay, we test the level, look for annoying things. As part of that process, at some point, you know, when it's later on, we're like, all right, well, we think that a red key, because a red key is a baseline that I try to establish first. I think a red key would be around this this time. And red keys are more important because, well, if they're the highest, you really don't want them to go that much higher. So you have to know a good amount of info about the level and routing the level to make an informed decision about the red key. Sometimes these decisions are more informed than other times. That's just how it works. You know, some levels get more tested. Some levels are not interesting enough for people to want to test them for some reason. You know, they're too much work, you could say. But either way, they are just guesses. And we start with the red time. Working backwards from red, in the stats, you'll often see that these red times, so if there's like a ratio that you can say that there is between like wood key and red. And often, a lot of them are around about double the length of the red key. So the multiplier, wood over red, is about 2 in these cases. It's a little bit lower in round 2 in these cases. But it depends on the kind of level that it is. Levels that are more open-ended tend to have a more spread out ratio between their lower times and their higher times. And levels that are very hard to execute but allow for worse execution also tend to have higher spreads, larger spreads for levels that can support them. Very linear kinds of levels that are not expected to have much divergence, and levels that are shorter tend to be a lot tighter for their times. Hence why some of the more linear ones are less than 2. For some of the more linear levels, not counting Lysosceles because it's just so short, they tend to be a little bit lower of a ratio. But we have a lot of the examples here, and this is not any different in the past. So compared to DLC 7, the average wood over red time was a little bit more lenient this DLC. However, there were fewer, so percentage-wise, just looking at this 95%, 95% of people that got a key on a level, or no, 95% of people that completed a level at all got a wood key, at least. Which is a little bit lower than the number in DLC 7, despite the average ratio, wood over red, being higher, meaning wood could be perceived as easier. But that's obviously not the whole story. Some levels are just harder than others. What about how hard red time was? Red is the bottom of this variable here. How are these red times? How many people are earning reds? Well, more people, 1% more people earned a red on DLC 7 maps than compared to DLC 9. So does that mean that the reds were also harder? It's close enough where it doesn't really matter. They ended up being about the same. Looking at other DLCs, we have DLC 8. I don't really count as far as normal keys because I had the teams do more of the deciding. But had wildly different kinds of ratios. And when I say wildly, I mean it's not really that wild. But you can see these are all in like the 80s, 90s, and then the reds are all in the a quarter to a third. So you tend to base these roughly off the ratios and then spread them out depending on the kind of level it is. That's basically how keys are chosen. And then you just guess. You gotta put something down. Why are there more inverts than standard leaderboards? Don't people like normal leaderboards more? Well, they do. They play the normal ones a lot more. But inverts, you just have to earn the invert and then you dip. So, sure, it's more content, but hey, it's more content. Just get your invert key and that's all you need to do. Do a fun little thing. Who cares about the number of maps? But it doesn't. That's not how I view it. Inverts they're achievements. People want some achievements, and they're not for everybody, but it's nice to have a lot of them. And you really don't want to compete on that many more standard leaderboards. It'd be a bit much. 6 is the number we've arrived at for 10 days. Over quite a number of time, a number of DLCs. How is DLC as a competitive focused event? Questions like, is DLC actually competitive? Is it for competitive people? A lot of these kinds of questions that are all kind of combined in one here. Well, my argument here is the Dust Force community is not a very competitive community. Dust Force itself, it's been around for a while. It's not exactly the golden age of Dust Force players. But DLC's doing what it can. DLC is certainly the most competitive event out of any kind of event for Dust Force, but the majority of the community for Dust Force cares more about let's just play custom levels. Let's enjoy what shows up on Atlas. Let's try the daily. You know, let's just enjoy the custom levels. People aren't really interested in the standard levels, the default levels, the stock levels so much. They don't really do full game runs that often. They often are kind of popular streams when they happen. But when I say popular, I'm talking about like, hey, double digits. Sometimes. You know, this isn't the most popular kind of game. But the community is happy being what it is, and that's fine. And that community is just not that competitive. That said, DLC I think embraces a competitive style environment about as much as it can, outside of specifically unique exhibitions, like races that can happen in an abrupt showcase kind of scenario, or similar kinds of things. We've had the RMA events recently, which don't really get that many people, but it's nice to have something like that. So DLC, is it, you know, specifically competitive? Well, it's good enough for the people that want it. And it encourages people to consider competition. Why no assigned challenges? Well, I need more help. I need people to assign challenges. Because I didn't assign the challenges, I need people to do that. How can people help with DLC? Well, good question. That's honestly not it's not something that has an easy answer. But I did just, you know, say one of the things that would be nice if there were people that did that kind of stuff. If anyone legitimately wanted to help with DLC or other kinds of events, especially with DLC, I would encourage them to actually, you know, listen to this postmortem, because I talked a lot about the different kinds of thought that goes into how DLC works, and what I did, and how I felt about it, how I think it could have gone differently. You know, DLC is something that's developed over a long period of time. But the thing is, I think very similarly about the other kinds of events that I do. I don't do postmortems for them all the time. I used to do postmortems for other things in the past, but DLC just happens to be the one that I do a postmortem for in this community. The way that people can help, though, really they just have to get in touch with me first. Otherwise, they're not really going to be able to do much, especially with DLC. Because with DLC, I just exercise more control over what happens, because it's more like, it's much more of a production at this point. So, if you want to be involved in DLC specifically, you got to talk to me. If you want to do whatever you want in Dustforce, you don't really need to talk to me. But, you know, in terms of event planning, you know, talk to me and I'll get you involved and stuff. There are other things that'll happen in the future. But, you know, if you want to be involved in DLC, then, you know, listen to this and be like, I am interested in this topic. Tell me what topic you're interested in, then I can go somewhere. If someone doesn't really have something in mind for how they're willing to help or able to help, then I don't really know what I can just offer them. You know, you can't do art for something if you don't say, like, I want to do art for something. But I'm not going to ask you if you're going to, you know, make logos and all that if you don't say anything about it. Yeah, plenty of things out there that could happen. it's a little too broad for me to just say like specifically what can happen though. There's always a lot of comments on maps. Like, I think the maps felt too long, or too execution heavy, too linear. Well, those levels are common in DLC, the ones that were brought up. In this case, there were some comments about levels being too execution or grind heavy. Some of those comments, I think there's a lot more going on that results in this kind of feeling that, just using this as an example, where if someone feels that something is too execution or grind heavy in DLC, there are a lot of contributing factors that you could argue are like all of these different reasons it's DLC's fault, not just the level's fault. You know, there are all these contributing factors. DLC in particular gives you 10 days. That's a long amount of time. And there aren't that many levels. And if a level is short, it's more exacerbated because how much more can you really do in that level? It's still just Dust Force, and this is DLC 9. Dust Force has been out for years. People are pretty good at the game, generally speaking, that play it to this level of competition. Big teams result in not many strats being missed. So there are a lot of different factors. I think that a lot of the time when talking about this, I like to talk about density, where I'm talking about like levels over time when I talk about things like difficulty as well. So if you don't have much time, then it can be a lot more difficult to compete because everybody's competing on this. You only got one day for it. You know, imagine if the daily, if DLC were basically just the daily but for a week. You know, every single map has exactly one day. You're gonna grind that one day, you know, whatever days work out for you. You know, maybe you only compete on a certain number of days. There are all kinds of ideas you could tie to this system. But some people will be like, I'm playing every day and I'm gonna try to do every day. There would be a meta around playing before the deadline because, you know, you want to make sure that you're on top of the leaderboard at the end of the deadline. And that's the same time every day. That kind of meta develops. There's all different kinds of things that would happen. But considering that, let's say people want variety in DLC levels, whether they want, you know, shorter or longer, linear, non-linear, whatever it is. I tend to just use what I get, ultimately. And I often get a variety, which is nice, but sometimes I'm missing a little bit here and there. You know, recently we've missed out on some kid-friendly maps, or you know, not just kid-friendly, but kid-fast maps, we'll say. But the thing is, that's not a bad thing. People don't actually really like grinding kid-dominant levels, because a lot of people don't really like playing kid. So the amount of kid that we get is kind of just right, where it's usually none. And I'm talking about, like, for the majority of people, they don't actually want to have to play kid. So if kid's gonna be fast on a level, it's nice if kid's not the only good option. Now that's a different story than DLC 7, where I had one man level, one girl level, one kid level, one worth level. That kind of thing. We tried, you know, let's just make each character have a level. It worked out. We'll do that occasionally. That kind of stuff works out in DLC pretty well. But I'm not gonna do it all the time. You know, and we just had DLC 8, where some people had to play kid. Sure, they, you know, chose, but They had to. And that's a big deal. There are other kinds of, consistent issues like replay ghosts don't work. Well, that's too bad. That's just a complication that comes up with the replay script. Ghosts, they just don't work. It's unfortunate, but maybe one day we'll be able to allow it to work. Dust Kid didn't really help out that much with this DLC, unfortunately. It's going through some tough times recently. But fortunately MSG able to be on call and fix one thing that showed up during round one of those days. So we'll hope that we get a little bit more Dust Kid development, hopefully. Do you guys have any questions? Anything else you want to hear about? Well, that's pretty much it. We got DLC 10 notes on the screen. Probably going to be around March, April again. We'll try something different. I have a pretty good idea for DLC 10. I'll say that much. I haven't told it to anybody yet, and which is kind of funny considering how I'm pretty sure, like, to Idol and Rodin and Camel and some other people, I listed off like a dozen core ideas for like how DLCs could work, and I just didn't say this one. So I don't know what exactly I want to do with it yet, but it's kind of related to things that I've said in the past. I would need to kind of add details a little bit to how it works, but let me think about how I want to tease it. Because there are some things that are worth keeping a secret. Because I like to have the surprises. But I think there's plenty of room for me to develop the idea. But I've said a lot of different stuff. I'll give you guys a variety of hints that will kind of lead you there. Not exactly, but I'm gonna say a lot of the possibilities that could happen for DLC. Because I've said a lot of them recently. So DLC 8, of course, reused DLC 2 ideas. It certainly could be a thing to revisit other DLCs. There are a few more noteworthy formats than others. So for example, we had Top Players versus the World. That was an interesting one that didn't really work out that well in practice. But hey, maybe with different ideas, we could change it up. But I don't know. DLC 5, we had that was a DLC that was about there were 2 different teams every round. Every week you got to choose which team you were on, and that's personally one of my favorite DLC formats that we've ever had. It's also I also wanted that DLC specifically to be heavily reliant on the challenge system, where because you don't really guarantee that the teams are going to be that even, you have 2 big teams with like 20 to 40 people. Whoever knows how many people are going to show up on one of these DLCs. One of these teams could be a little bit bigger than the other. Well, you can't just like count keys and be like, this team earned more than the other and then call that fair, because one team could just be bigger and have the better players. So you got like team dogs versus team cats, and then at the first day of the week, you're like, all right, well, I'm team dogs. So then you join the team. You might have to make a map, who knows? But then you play the levels. You're with everybody on your team, share strats with your team, all that. It's basically the same, but it's only 1 week. When the week's over, we get the final result. Team dogs beat team cats. But we try to pick a few. In that format, we pick a few teams in advance, like dogs and cats, that I'll pose a lot of questions, like a survey, to people when they sign up, and be like, what do you think of, red versus blue, dogs versus cats? Pick what side you would be on for each of these. And then I pick the results that would end up with the most interesting, reliable teams. That's how that system would work. Now, how I would score that, how I'd be interested in scoring that kind of system would be a different kind of, imagine this challenge system. But the thing is, you don't get points for leaderboards anymore, or keys. You only get points for challenges. So you got to actually challenge somebody on the other team, and the DLC is basically just 1v1s. Whatever team wins more 1v1s is gonna win. So that's a little twist that I would make for that kind of DLC, as an example of something we could do, building off that system, and also a better use of the challenge system. There's a lot of potential in those kinds of ideas. Now, I've also considered doing things like, all right, well, maybe it's not 2, maybe it's 3, Maybe there's team 1, team 2, team 3. There are 3 options instead of 2. That creates an interesting dynamic of, now you got 3 teams against each other. You got 2 opponents, or maybe sometimes you want to ally with one for situations. Who knows? What else we got? I've also been interested in exploring the idea of, like, what if there could be coaches. Imagine kind of top players versus the world, except instead of top players versus the world, the top players are coaching all of the teams and able to kind of steer where they can end up. Let's say there are just some people like me and I don't know, Arb. Everybody likes Arb on their team. Well, you can have Arb on all of your teams. But the thing is, Arb gets to decide how he wants to share strats and ideas and help out each team separately. So the top players, in this case, being coaches, or people that want to specifically be coaches, whoever the coaches are, they kind of get to pull strings in a funny way, where they could be motivated in a way that promotes balance. And they're obviously at their discretion not sharing strats from one team to the other. You wouldn't want to do that. You want to let teams have their own strats. But if a team's like really far behind, these coaches can kind of come in and be like, hey, I think you guys need to stop going under this section of this level. That kind of stuff. Yeah, so there's an interesting possibility for coaching in DLC. That's why I threw coaching on the feedback. Are you interested in coaching in DLCs? That's why that one's in there. Curious if that has a potential out there. What else? There have been individual style DLC ideas in my mind for a while. Someone in chat said Survivor as well earlier. Yeah, Conscious said that. That's something that's been up there too for a while. I've definitely teased that idea in the past. I think that that would be very hard to pull off, but I would more likely do that in a BRB style scenario, which or Abrupt Showcase exhibition style scenario, because the difficulty with eliminating people in a DLC is pretty high. It's pretty hard to get around trying to eliminate people, and it's something that I have personally wanted to do for quite a long time. I think it would be very interesting to actually eliminate people, either entire teams or have people vote people off of their teams, which honestly it's a very interesting scenario, but I don't think teams would actually handle it well. You know, it sounds really fun and funny in theory, but it would be, you know, absolutely horrible for the people that it actually affects. So over a long style DLC, you really can't do that. Over a shorter one, it's still probably too long to actually make good use of that. So I would likely do it for other events, but I do very much like that kind of situation being in an event. And I do think that, you know, just don't enter, that is that's a totally valid thing to ask in any kind of event. You know, if you're not buying into the structure of the event, then you don't have to enter. But the thing is, DLC being more of the mainstream kind of thing and trying to be friendly towards allowing people to enter is, you know, kind of at odds with if we can actually make it work out. So I'd probably not do it in DLC, I'd do it in something else. But, you know, plenty of cool ideas out there. Something individual style. Imagine you're not on a specific team and you just earn points for yourself on leaderboards. Like, you know, imagine this is the basic requirement of an individual style DLC. With this, imagine we had like a fantasy draft kind of scenario, a fantasy league. So everybody's playing for themselves, obviously, but you yourself get to pick who is on your team. And maybe people are worth like different amounts of points or something. Like you got to buy this player, and you know, Fishy's worth a certain amount of points, and like Paul's worth a certain amount of points, and then like, you know, bargain player over here is worth like this many players points or something like that. So the you would get whatever your team adds up to in some way that it gets measured. Maybe there's a budget that you have, maybe there are some limits, but it wouldn't be just you doing this. You know, it's your fantasy team, and you could also so you obviously want people on your fantasy team to succeed. Maybe there's a little bit of strat sharing that happens, but you don't want to be too friendly with what you give away, because like, hey, you know, get me on your team, share strats with me if you're not that good. If you just give those tips to somebody else that's actually on your team, that's a little funny. You know, that's another interesting kind of scenario that can happen as a result of that style of situation in a DLC setting. And that's the kind of stuff that I like, putting people in interesting situations and having them make interesting decisions. You know, a little bit outside of the game of Dust Force, but you know, there's a lot of potential out there. Well, that's about as much of a teaser as I've explained to other people. You know, most of those ideas are kind of out there now. I have a pretty good idea of what I will actually do for DLC 10, like I said. And it is, you know, there are bits and pieces that I've said in the past of things that I like or have done before that I would certainly borrow from for a DLC 10. But at the very least, I'll make up my mind exactly what I'm going to do around like February. And then DLC 10 will happen around March or April. It's a good time to try something different. I have something different in mind. And then we'll DLC 11. You know, we'll bring it back together. All right, what else is going on? You see at the bottom of the screen there. Maybe there's a CMR that'll happen. I don't know. Abrupt Showcase. That could happen. I didn't include it, but they're probably gonna be 12 Days of Alice. That'll be by Miles and Jake. That has been in December in the past, last 2 years. So maybe that. I will be doing the next map competition at the very least. So all these other ones are more unconfirmed. I'm doing the map competition. So I do the DLCs and I do the map competition. That's basically what I do. CMJs are cool, but they're kind of not worth doing if 12 Days of Alice happens, because everybody just kind of, you know, kills what ramens they want to make on that. And all that is just like, you know, 12 of them in a row. You know, it's not a crazy new idea. There have been, you know, jams, fill in the blank jams before. This is just 12 of them. So if you want that, then you want another 12 Days of Alice. Now, I would like some help on the Abrupt Showcase. So I'm going to explain a little bit about that and how the next few months will go. So for the Abrupt Showcase in particular, first of all, you have to understand that the Abrupt Showcase tries to raise money for the Best of 2025 map competition prize pool. We crowdfund the prize pool, and the Abrupt Showcase is basically just an exhibition, well, a series of exhibitions, you know, marathon light style, 1 or 2 days, whatever we get. And we'll do little incentives to raise money for the prize pool. And the winners of the map competition get the prize money. That's exactly how it goes. So this year, I'm not really a big fan of the Abrupt Showcase ending up being around the same time as 12 Days. And I've wanted like a December CMR before, because you know, it makes sense to have a CMR at the end of the year, and people are going to make good maps for the CMR, which end up being in the map competition. So I would like to do that, but I don't see any reason to do a CMR around that time period if there's also 12 days. That's the way it is. I've said, though, maybe there's going to be a November CMR. I don't know. In the past, when I asked about CMR and also Dark City, there has been interest in map making for CMR specifically, and it's like, it's not really that much map maker interest, honestly. I'm surprised I got as many as I did for DLC, but like, people just don't really commit to making maps most of the time. And at this point, I can really only get them to do it for DLC, which is good enough for me, in my opinion. And if they want to do other kinds of stuff like, you know, 12 Days of Alice, that's a good way to just do it for this event, because you don't have to prepare for it. That's why people get convinced to do things during DLC and during map jams. That's why those are the two first events that I started to put on in the community, because people don't make maps for CMRs, and then CMRs don't happen. And they will instead be convinced to make maps live. It turns out, you know, well, we need a map for this event. Here's your team. Your team makes a map together. You only have a time period. Here you go. And that's how DLC came about. So, because that's the case, and because people, you know, make maps when they have to, kind of, you know, in those scenarios, those are just easier to do. Then, so Abrupt Showcase, it's a marathon. We'll include things like races if people want to do races in them. So if you guys want to do like an any percent race, or if you want to do like an RMA exhibition, if you want to do a special kind of run, that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for in Abrupt Showcase. I will be looking for runners. I am also looking for someone to help put it on. So if any of you have ideas for the kinds of things that you want in the next Abrupt Showcase, then please reach out to me, because I'm not going to be doing this alone. If I do it alone, I'm not going to bother even putting it on until like January, honestly. But if you guys, you know, whether it's January or not, if any of you have interest in those kinds of things, please get in touch with me. You know, there are a lot of cool ideas that people want, things like bingo tournaments, or, you know, an RMA tournament, or a multiplayer tournament, you know, any of that kind of stuff. We can do an exhibition for it in the Abrupt Showcase, and then if people like that, then there's enough reason to do a tournament potentially. You know, maybe there's a reason to do like a little King of the Hill showcase, not just survival. Maybe we do an exhibition that is basically like a spin-off of the round 2 bounty map making that we had, where 2 people do like a 1v1. They make a map and then they race each other to SS the other person's map. You know, that kind of stuff can happen. In the last couple Abrupt Showcases, we have included the Blind Relay Blitz, which is basically just, you know, mini exhibitions on a team. A little competition for that. Inside an exhibition. But yeah, plenty of ideas out there. But I do need help to put on the Abrupt Showcase this year. Otherwise, that might not even happen, honestly. Now, I would like to do that before the map competition, because it raises money for the map competition. But the map competition is going to be like early to mid-January. That's when the judging takes place. Early mid-January is when it takes place, because all maps that are released in 2025 are eligible for the competition. So, you know, even if something releases on New Year's Eve, it's eligible. So therefore you can't judge before the year's over. That's why the competition takes place in January. I could see doing the Abrupt Showcase first, second weekend of January, roughly. And then one of the following or like next 2 weekends, we announce the map competition results. I would probably like doing it that way. It wouldn't feel too rushed for right now, because if like we do it in November, then it's going to be actually an Abrupt Showcase. And that's the way it definitely always goes. The original Abrupt Showcase was only put together over like a day, and it lasted 2 days. We just got a lot of people together and we're like, yeah, let's just raise money for the competition. And then I got a bunch of marathon style runs in a row. So, if Abrupt Showcase happens, maybe it'll end up being January or November, December. I don't know, but talk to me if you're interested. If a CMR happens, it faces the same kind of scrutiny scheduling wise. I don't like scheduling things too close to the holidays. So it's kind of like looking at calendar. You're kind of looking at like December 6th and 13th and 20th and trying to decide if there's one of those weekends that's reasonable. And probably picking the one in the middle most of the time. But it's going to be hard to get people to make maps for CMR if there's, 12 map jams in a row. That's 12 days of Alice. So I have my doubts unless it happens like kind of soon about CMR. But hey, I mean, we'll do whatever makes sense when it comes up. I think that's it. It's been another fun DLC. Plenty of things to talk about. I talked about more design concepts this postmortem. No one really had questions. Talked for almost 4 hours. Is there a theme for CMR? There's not even a CMR confirmed. I don't know if what's gonna happen or not. The only thing that I have planned is the map competition for early January is when the judging takes place. There have been over 60 CMRs that have happened without themes. But personally, I am in support of having themes for CMRs. Because I would rather not have a CMR, I'd rather have a themed Nexus be released at a time. So, I think CMRs need to pivot more into that territory, personally. I think CMRs are outdated for the community. Some people have tried to make Dark Force happen. Not very successful, I'll have you know, so far. But Dark Force, Dark City has had some amount of progress. If anyone is interested in working on that, they can also get in touch with me if they really want, and I will forward them where they need to go. I don't run that or anything, but Dark Force is in need of a project leader that is willing to run it and actually see some results. Yeah, if I had to guess, there could be a CMR that happens. I'm just, I'm not committing to it. Does anyone want to run the CMR themselves? Is basically what I'm getting at. Because I don't have to run everything myself. I'm running the map competition and trying to get someone to help me with the Abrupt Showcase. Now, I think a CMR could combine with the Abrupt Showcase if people wanted to do that. And what's involved in running a CMR is basically you gather all the maps, you gather all the map makers, make a nexus with all the doors for them. Or if you're not making the nexus, get someone to do it for you. Pretty easy, that's it. Just release them all at the same time. So if anyone wants to get involved in any of that stuff, they can get in touch with me. I'll steer them in the right direction. But that's what we got. Good postmortem.